listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for another edition of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly divided surface of our world. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am your indefatigable, the burning emperor in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. It is October 20th. It's just past 7 a.m. Eastern, and Jamarl is back.
I am back.
How was it?
It was phenomenal. So he gave affidavits to pretty much everybody in the press on things that were being said and everything else. And I got all sorts of quotes. I haven't cut the video yet from it, but it was a really good meeting. I mean, these guys were basically military guys, and so it wasn't sensational. It was just this basic, here are the facts. I was here. This was what took place. This is what I saw. This is what they told me, et cetera, et cetera. At one point, he made a point that said, I didn't realize how extensive this was. He was there at his base.
Well, hang on. Let's set this up.
My bad,
Set this up for people, if you would.
So
what we're talking
yesterday,
about.
Bob Saleas, a military guy, basically in charge of nuclear weapons, had a meeting. It was him and 4 other military people who basically were there at the National Press Club for politicians and for press, basically talking about nukes and UFOs and this kind of the way that nukes have been cut off. ICBM nukes have been cut off by UFOs. And he basically made this point that I think he said in an 8-day period, 20 nukes have been shut off at different facilities, not even at the same facility. In 6 months, it was 30 nukes at ICBMs. And again, this wasn't just in the United States, even though the ones he's recounting are in the United States. He had multiple military officials there. He had some of the people who had previously died who were giving testimony, because again, this stuff was going back for like 30 years. And as he's talking about it, each person who came up and gave testimony, very flat fact testimony of this is where it was, this is my position, this is who I am, this is the base where I worked, this is what happened, here's a FOIA request talking about it.
He was he was bringing other testimony up.
Yes.
That's awesome.
All sorts of
That's
stuff
awesome.
out. And he makes the point that in each of the cases, inevitably, he will be told, keep this to yourself. That's an order. You will not say anything about this. One of those guys kept that secret for 17 years. Didn't even tell his wife. I was like, you didn't even tell your wife. And so he makes this point. Like one guy, for example, worked as some kind of photolithic analysis. He basically in photography and everything else. And he talks about how initially they were looking at these ICBMs. They were basically creating nuclear ICBMs to try to overcome the Soviet Union's ability to knock them down. And so basically it would have multiple launch sequences, where in the last sequence, it would have this head of it, or the top part of it, go into space. Whereas the thought is that if the Soviets are trying to hit it down, they would hit the body of the rocket and miss the nuclear payload at the top, where it can just sail over the defenses and hit the Soviet Union. This is some really grim stuff that these guys are talking about and what they're working on. And so some of the tests were failing, some of them were succeeding. They were getting these kind of images, and his job was to get images of it. So eventually they said, look, we need a farther back image. So we need to be able to see the entire launch sequence. And so they go back several miles, they set up the photography, great. He gets a call 2 days later after the launch. And they're in the room, he says, what's that? And he's looking at the video of it, everything goes up, it looks great, the launch happens, everything is supposed to happen. This thing is going 8,000 to 10,000 miles an hour. A craft flies into the screen, hits a beam of light at the top, beam of light on the side, beam of light at the bottom, and it flies out. Now keep in mind, this is going 8 to 10,000 miles an hour as this thing is going around it, and the thing just falls down, the payload goes down. And the guys are looking at him like, are you guys screwing around with the video? And he says, no, that looks like a UFO. And he was like, you are never to say that word again. Not just never to say that word, you are never to even breathe a word of this. And if your testicles are being burned by somebody who's questioning you, you would tell them that it was some kind of laser thing that didn't even exist at the time frame. But no, it was fascinating. Some of the people got injured. The troops were basically freaking out. They would say that a craft is hovering right over the facility itself, like right outside the gate. And the soldiers, initially, from at least Saleas' testimony, calls them and says, hey, there's a light that's pulsating out in the distance. It's kind of freaking us out. And he's like, all right, I don't know, I don't know what that is, whatever. He gets another call, same guy, panicked. The guy's freaking out big time. And he says there's a craft pulsating, hovering right above the ground over top of the nuclear silos. And it's right outside the gate. And Celeste is like, well, what are you talking about? Are you talking about like a UFO? And at this point, the guard is freaked out. One of the other guards got so freaked out that both of these guys had to be deposed of their duty and basically sent elsewhere. One guy got injured, apparently trying to climb the gate. But eventually, the craft shut up. I mean, at the point where it shut off, they started shutting down one after the next within seconds of one another. And keep in mind, these silos are independently powered.
Yeah.
So there shouldn't be a situation. The entire point of it is if one goes down, the other ones can still fire.
Yeah.
One after the next goes down. And the FOIA request shows that the government was basically saying, we're gravely concerned about, this thing happening for no reason, because nobody wanted to put there was a UFO sitting outside of the gate when this stuff was coming down. And this was happening apparently across the U.S.
When was this again? Let's just date this.
1967, I believe he said.
I thought that was the range. Are we sure these weren't just very Soviet-friendly aliens, Jamarl?
Well, no, because it was happening to the Soviet Union also.
Oh, was it really?
Yes.
Was that part of? Was that in this testimony?
He didn't have it in his testimony. They didn't have any Soviets there to talk about it. But this was, let me see, September 14, 1964 was one of them. I think they see another one from 1945.
That is fantastic. Okay,
Yeah.
Something to come back to.
I don't want to go too far into it.
No, yeah,
it's
there's
awesome. And
more.
At some point, I'm probably going to do a monologue on it. But
That's kind of what I was
it
figuring.
was phenomenal.
That's very cool. That's good to hear. And thanks for telling me. We hadn't talked about it off air. I wanted to I just also forgotten a little bit, but I also wanted to make sure we got to it on air. I wanted to make sure we hit it while we were on air. But that's very interesting. It sounds like
they were very credible.
They don't like nukes. The aliens that are being described
They don't
here
like nukes.
don't
That's what
like
Bob Salas says.
Which
He
means
says,
I like these aliens,
Because
Bradley.
he was like, I didn't take it as a threat. I took it as this thing of, you guys are going to kill yourself, stop screwing around. The question that I asked him, he misunderstood the question the first time around, but I asked him basically, are you concerned that the threat narrative is basically being created and the stories that are basically unverified? There's no way for us to understand or to know what's going on behind the scenes. And these guys have lied for 80 years by their own admission at this point, right? I mean, the ODNI report basically saying these are physical objects, et cetera, et cetera. And so by their own admission, they lied. And yet, they're coming out now, okay, I know we lied for 80 years, but here's what really happened, and here's what's really going on. I mean, even the ODNI report only went for like to the year 2000. I mean, they didn't even go back to the previous issues that were clearly there and established. They just kind of act like, okay, we're just going to cut this for these few years and just talk about these issues.
Yeah.
But no, man, it was good. It was really good. It was rewarding.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Let's get into headlines here. First up, no, you're good. I let us into it. First up in COVID news, yesterday in the United States, there were 83,624 new COVID cases reported, along with 1,557 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 79,348 cases per day. That's a decrease of 22% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 57% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated at this point. 66% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. And as of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 45,120,516 people across the United States. It has also killed 728,400 people here in the U.S. In national news, a lawsuit filed Tuesday is challenging Oklahoma's law against school discussions of racism and sexism. It's the first federal suit to allege that a conservative state's so-called critical race theory ban is inherently unconstitutional. Similar previous laws were passed ostensibly to eliminate instruction about critical race theory, an obscure legal concept about the ongoing impacts of slavery and racism in the U.S. that's rarely taught in K-12 schools. But the laws almost never mention the theory, and teachers say the new laws limit important lessons on history and on current events. On Monday, the Supreme Court released 2 unsigned opinions blocking cases against police officers accused of using excessive force. That's in a massive win for supporters of qualified immunity. The privilege is awarded to government officials and police officers, which allow them to avoid a lawsuit unless another person's rights were clearly violated. We'll be talking about this, by the way, with 2 guests in just a couple of minutes, I believe.
Excuse me, not even clearly violated. It has to be explicitly expressed in law, meaning they would have had to go over the case prior in order for it to take effect. Meaning, you could have a situation.
There has to be a precedent.
It has to be a precedent, explicit precedent set, which is insane. Which means it basically never happens. I mean, so you can have a situation where there was one case where a cop was shooting at a dog, continuously missed, ends up hitting a kid. And initially they said, okay, well, clearly the cop had no business doing that. But then an appellate court comes back and says, no, he was within the course of his duty, and there's no case law explicitly saying that this is wrong, so qualified immunity applies. It's insane, the level that they are allowing. This case where, somebody's coming at a cop with a hammer, okay, maybe fair enough, right? But in some of these other cases, it's utterly tragic ruling that basically goes with no accountability associated with it. But yeah, we're going to have two guests. I'm going to white knight it. We're going to have a conversation about it. Probably going to be pretty spirited.
All right, there we go. And we're coming. This will be, when we say two guests, this isn't like just a couple minutes. 7:15 and 7:30, we're going to be speaking with Joseph Blattler and Joe Key.
I'm giving up my monologue for this.
And Jamarl's giving up his monologue. You asked for this one.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I saw that case and was flipping out on text message to Austin. I was like, dude, get your cop buddy.
You've taken up the white knight mantle on your own. This has not been foisted upon you.
No. This was, it just seems, even Spider-Man understood with great responsibility comes, with great power comes great responsibility. And these guys have basically turned that on its head and was like, yeah, we want the great power, but we don't want any of the responsibility associated with having that level of power and authority within the law. So, yeah, we have the conversation.
We'll get into it here. I'll keep it on with headlines. Per chief congressional correspondent for CNN, Manu Raju, Biden told House progressives tuition-free community college is out of the package. That's according to multiple sources. Child tax credit won't go as far as some would like. Likely a one-year extension. Home health care will likely be less than $250 billion. Democrats had wanted $400 billion. Climate change is still a debate. In talking to House progressives at votes tonight, was clear as the climate change provisions are not settled and still a sticking point after a recent White House meeting over them. Jared Huffman told me he's a no. This is Jamarl speaking.
Yep.
Jared Huffman told Jamarl he's a no if the final bill doesn't have the aggressive emissions reductions. Asked about Manchin's opposition to achieving a 50% reduction over the next decade, Huffman told Jamarl, quote, "We're not going to let that be the final world."
Well, they didn't tell me. It's Maju Raju, or whatever the guy's name
You're
is.
quoting this other dude. Yeah. I see. You wrote this headline a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say per, what's his name? And basically all of it is his commentary on it.
I get it. We're not going to let that be the final word. My view, this is the 13th Amendment moment. President Lincoln did whatever he did to get that vote. This is one of those times, end quote. Yesterday, the FBI raided a Washington mansion belonging to billionaire Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska. Agents blocked off the property with crime scene tape and stormed through the house. The raid comes during a long battle with Deripaska in an effort to get him removed from a U.S. sanctions list. In June, a judge at a district court in Washington rejected a lawsuit he had filed against the U.S. Treasury Department, which sanctioned him in 2018. We'll be talking about this next hour with Lee Stranahan. A new study done by economists and organizations, including and regarding the National Retail Federation, has found that America is in a supply shortage, not as much from a lack of shipping, but that Americans are so unbelievably hungry to buy anything they can right now. Inventory sales ratios in the country are at a 10-year low compared to how much stuff sellers have on hand versus how much consumers are buying. The Port of Los Angeles also found a 30% uptick in incoming cargo in the first 9 months of the year. In the same time frame, retail sales rose 14.5% and is expected to end at 10.5 to 13.5% in the year. This also makes perfect sense. The supply shortage thing, it's also just that consumers are spending a lot of money right now, have been spending a lot of money, which if you get stimulus checks, that's what you're supposed to do, right?
Kind of. I mean, there are hunger boats waiting off the coast.
Yeah.
That, can't even come in. Not to mention issues in China, issues like where there's energy issues that have cut down on COVID issues in some of the other countries.
To be clear, we're way after the stimulus checks right now.
Yeah.
I said stimulus checks were like many, many, many months after the most recent one. But there was a time there where a bunch of people just got an influx of money. You know what I mean? That's what I was saying.
Yeah, totally. I mean, but this seems to be more along the lines of some of it is inflation, of course.
Yeah.
And some of it, a lot of it, like I said, it's like 100 ships waiting off the coast. And Biden is like, okay, we're going to run the coast 24 hours. Yeah, dude, that's not going to do it. That's not going to cut it. We're beyond that. And then you have energy shortages in China, COVID issues in other countries. Keep in mind, the rich countries are the ones that are vaccinated. The poor countries are the ones that are not. But the poor countries are the ones where many of the inventory and stuff gets done. So.
I need to keep going through headlines here. Let me get through it. In international news, a Brazilian congressional panel is set to recommend that President Jair Bolsonaro be charged with quote-unquote crimes against humanity for his treatment of coronavirus in the country. The assertion is that Bolsonaro intentionally let COVID-19 rip through Brazil in an effort to kill hundreds of thousands to achieve herd immunity. The recommendations include 69 other high-ranking officials, including Bolsonaro's 3 sons. Originally, the panel was seeking homicide and genocide charges for the detriment to indigenous people, but has concluded with crimes against humanity. In business news, Southwest Airlines have reversed course and say they won't put unvaccinated employees on unpaid leave if they're seeking an exemption. American Airlines Flight Attendant Union told its members they will not be terminated if they are not vaccinated. Southwest stated the workers can, in fact, continue working if they follow COVID safety policies until their request is reviewed. The new policy will begin in December. And of course, this might relate to the conversation we were having a little while back about Southwest having to cancel all these flights kind of last minute as people scrambled, and people were speculating online that it had to do with people getting fired over not getting vaccinated, basically.
That's what they were saying, but Southwest was saying that wasn't true.
So they were saying that wasn't true, but now they've reversed their course as if to appease the public and maybe, vindicate them. I don't know. Anyway, holiday news here too real quickly. Today is National Day on Writing, World Osteoporosis Day, and Support Your Local Chamber of Commerce Day. Or what? Anyway, by giving them my money, what do you want? No, I'm just kidding. They can do some good work sometimes. Anyway, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And I'm going to take us right into our break here. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back in a minute, starting a conversation with Joseph Blattler. We will be continuing that conversation into the next segment with Joe Key. We're talking qualified immunity after these unsigned opinions from the Supreme Court blocking cases against police officers accused of using excessive force. This pertains, of course, dramatically to the events of last year, carrying on into this year, and we're going to be getting into it. Jamarl here particularly is going to be getting fiery, but we'll leave that to the other side of the break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the report.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, a phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled in favor of police officers in 2 cases involving qualified immunity. The 2 cases, basically, the decision issued on Monday was unsigned, which means no justices dissented. 2 cases concern police officers accused of using excessive force when responding to domestic disturbances. In one, officer used a beanbag round and a knee on the suspect's back to subdue him. In the second, officer shot and killed the suspect after he approached him with raising a hammer. So we're going to get into a conversation on this issue of qualified immunity. Joining us to talk about it is Joseph Blattler. He's a former deputy chief of police in Union City, New Jersey. He's also a professor of criminal justice and principal operator of East Coast Private Investigations. He has over 30 years of military and police experience and has assisted many law firms and expert reports in federal, state, and municipal courts. Joseph, thank you for joining us again.
Welcome. How are you?
I am doing all right. So let's get into it. So qualified immunity first was outlined in 1967. It needs to be clear this is not a law from the standpoint of Congress. This is a quirk that the Supreme Court basically put out that basically repudiated the Ku Klux Klan laws that were put into place in order to protect blacks. Qualified immunity is a judicial doctrine created by the Supreme Court that shields state actors from liability for their misconduct, even when they break the law. Under this doctrine, government agents, including but not limited to police officers, can never be sued for violating someone's civil rights unless they violated clearly, quote, clearly established law, unquote. While this is amorphous, malleable standard. It generally requires civil rights plaintiffs to show not just a clear legal rule, but a prior case with functional identical facts. Is that true? Meaning, is there anything that you disagree with I just said there in regards to the reading of what this qualified immunity is?
No, that's true.
Okay. So, in other words, a person can do something, meaning a cop. They can be on the job. They can do it. It can be flagrant in regards to breach of the person's civil liberties. It could result in death or anything else. But as long as they're on the job and there's no civil case or there's nothing that sets a precedent, regardless of how egregious, the cop is not personally liable. Is that correct?
Well, you're kind of simplifying it. And when you simplify it, it's not correct.
Okay. Make it more complex for me. I mean, I can give specific cases if you want. But go for it.
About the case. Let's talk about the case that the Supreme Court just heard, the one in actually Union City, California.
Okay.
That whole case revolved around. It was a violent suspect in domestic violence. The family called that he had a chainsaw. He was destroying the property. They were in fear of their lives. They locked themselves in a room. The police came. They used non-lethal force, had a knife to disarm him. When he got on the ground, he had a second knife. The police officer placed his knee in the suspect's back for 8 seconds. The knee in the back for 8 seconds. That is not excessive force.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that if qualified immunity wasn't there, meaning cops didn't get this kind of extra bonus of protection, that a jury would have found those cops liable in any particular way? Because as I listen to this, I think to myself, well, the guy was violent. I don't see anything wrong with him trying to subdue the guy.
He has a chainsaw and then a knife.
Exactly. So I look at that and think to myself, yeah, the cop will get off. Not even just get off. The case probably wouldn't even get heard. So why do they need qualified immunity in a situation like that, considering that case, that cop would walk? I mean, keep in mind, 1,000 killings a year. Cops kill 1,000 people a year on average. I think we're up to 890-something this year. 99% of those cases never go to court at all, meaning those cops face no charges. So if that's true, where they get this kind of huge bonus of protection, why do they need this extra bonus?
Well, this one did go to court, didn't it?
This one did go to court. But my point is, it went to the Supreme Court and it was basically pushed away. Nobody would have convicted that cop of doing that.
Do you want a system where a cop walks up to a person, simply pokes him in the chest, and then we go to court and litigate it?
But come on, that's overblowing or that's overplaying. You're talking about simplification. We're not talking about cases like that. How about Corbett versus Vickers? Corbett versus Vickers, you had a police officer that pursued a criminal suspect into an unrelated family's backyard with one adult, 6 kids. The cop had the kids all get on the ground. And when the dog came in, they were shooting at the dog, missed the dog, hit one of the kids. And qualified immunity basically came in and said, well, look, there's no previous case precedent for this. And the Supreme Court or nobody has basically ruled on this specific case. So qualified immunity doesn't apply. That's egregious.
That is an outlier.
Why are you saying that's an outlier? How is that an outlier? I guess that's my point. No, you're making the point of basically saying any random person could poke a cop and then they'll go to court. And I think that's nonsense. Again, I make the point that cops are able to kill 1,000 people a year with 99% walking. Those cases don't even see the light of day, meaning those cases don't even go to court. 99%.
This question.
But wait, real quick. But you're trying to make the point of saying that despite the fact that those cases go that way, that for whatever reason, a cop will poke somebody in the chest and they'll go to court. If they're not going to court for murder, they're not going to go to court for poking somebody in the chest.
I haven't heard him too much. Joseph, what are you going to say?
You just said that kneeling on a person's back for 8 seconds deserves to be heard in court.
I didn't say that. I said I would perfectly understand that, and I would say that no court in the world will prosecute that cop. Shane and I sat here and said, well, yeah, that's probably fair game. The guy had a chainsaw. The guy had a knife. I have no issue with them disarming the guy.
I'm saying that case should never be entered a courtroom.
I think you and Jamarl agree on that, by the way.
We agree. Yeah, we agree. I totally agree with that.
Go for it, Joseph.
You bring up the 1,000 people that are shot and killed by police every year. Are you saying every single one of those is murder?
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that at all. I'm making the point, though, that do you believe that 99% of those are clean kills?
Honestly, overwhelming majority of police shootings are justifiable.
Okay, but if the overwhelming majority of justifiable, this isn't the 99% number. What's the number that's not justifiable? And by the way, there's reporting that came out for the New York Times. I think this was last month, More than half of police killings are mislabeled. New study, research comparing information from death certificates with data from organizations that track police killings in the United States identified a startling discrepancy. They're going to the point of saying 55% of the killings are basically misidentified, meaning that number is higher than 1,000. But we can go with 1,000.
But what are they basing it on?
Well, they did a study. This is right here. Researchers compared information from a federal database known as the National Vital Statistics System, which collects death certificates, with recent data from 3 organizations that track police killings through news reports and public record requests. When extrapolating and modeling the data back decades, they identified a startling discrepancy. About 55% of the fatal encounters with police between 1980 and 2018 were listed as another cause of death.
So you're saying they weren't shot by the police? They weren't killed by the police?
I'm just saying that most cases weren't reported. So there were only, say, 1,000 a year, but maybe there's more like 2,000 a year, and half of those didn't get reported.
Right, 50, like 1,500, yes.
Approximately 50% of them don't get reported, that kind of thing, if that's what you're saying, Jamarl.
Yeah. I mean, this is what the study is saying. The study was conducted by researchers at the University of Washington, published on Thursday in The Lancet, major British medical journal. I guess the point that I'm making here is...
Maybe the numbers are far higher.
Right. And 99% is astonishing. And I agree with you that all of those cases are not going to be quote unquote murder. But I think you can agree with me that even if you say the overwhelming majority, let's say 60%, it's still 30% of people that are being killed by cops, where those cops should see some level of retribution, but they're basically protected through qualified immunity, and they're basically protected through the courts for doing anything about the response. How is that right?
Well, I don't think it's as high as 30%. Based on research I've done, every case I've worked on, the amount of people unjustifiably being shot by police is extremely small and rare.
Why do you believe that? And I guess what I'm asking is, where are you getting that from? I mean, 90% is astonishing. I mean, 99% is astonishing. That's not matched anywhere else in the world. And even if I give you the overwhelming majority, maybe fair shoots or clean kills, that still leaves a huge, what I would consider, a large sum of people that are basically killed without any level of justice associated with it.
To fit the model here, and then I want to hand it back to you, Joseph, but say it's 80%, say 80%, and you probably think it's higher, but say 80% of shoots are clean kills, that kind of thing, and only 1% of overall cases get adjudicated. That means that only 1 in 20 unclean shoots goes to court and sees some real scrutiny. In other words, even though, you could have a majority of shoots be okay, but if so few of them get scrutiny, you still have a lack of justice on a larger level. People are getting shot with no recourse. And I can hear that side.
Okay, so if say you're correct, and that's the point. Where are the district attorneys and the prosecutors in this? And by the way, I want to point this out too to people, because most people don't know this. District attorneys and prosecutors have what they call absolute immunity. They could falsely imprison you, maliciously prosecute you, and they're absolutely immune from prosecution. So if you're saying that there's this number of police shootings that are going unreported and uninvestigated, where's the state elected district attorneys and prosecutors?
Well, I mean, we've seen this all the time where the prosecutor would basically come out and not take the case. Look at Breonna Taylor. You had the situation where cops barge into the house, no knock warrant. The guy they open fire, kills Breonna Taylor. But the one person who gets caught is the guy who didn't even shoot her. The bullet went through somewhere else, and they basically prosecuted him for somewhere else. They prosecuted him only because they were trying to appease the public. I mean, over and over again, these guys are. And look, by the way, I don't like the prosecutor thing either. I mean, that's not something where I'm like, we're having a specific conversation about qualified immunity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I love the fact that prosecutors
It seems like they run cover. It seems like they run cover. The perception that I have is that the judicial system, including, DAs, et cetera, will run cover for police because they're part of the same system. At the end of the day, some are in the same places. They have dinners with each other's families. They know each other and see each other in the halls all the time, that kind of thing.
That's why it's often kicked to the federal government to do it.
But Joseph, what's your take?
Yeah.
That takes place from time to time. But going back to Breonna Taylor, that you're talking about a criminal matter there. That was heard by a criminal grand jury. Qualified immunity has nothing to do with criminal cases.
Well, no, I'm not using it in terms of qualified immunity. I'm just making the point that you're bringing up that prosecutors don't necessarily bring those cases. And I'm saying that oftentimes they don't bring those cases. I mean, that's one of those things where this kind of relationship between cops and prosecutors, et cetera. All these guys are part of the same milieu. But that's not necessarily indicative of, you're asking why they don't bring the case. But let's do this. We have
our next guest on the line joining us now for an additional perspective, and it's just about to get more fiery. Joseph, you're sticking with us, right?
Yes, I'll be here.
Thank you. Thank you,
Excellent.
sir. Really appreciate it. We're joined now by Joe Key on the line, former lieutenant for the Baltimore Police Department, over 25 years of experience. For 10 of those years, by the way, he served as the commanding officer for firearms training. He's written the department's policies on use of lethal force and hostage negotiation, and is considered an expert witness in criminal trials. Joe, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Doing fine, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. Yeah, we're having this conversation about qualified immunity, a debate, quick back and forth. It's only getting more packed with you in the room, but we're glad to have you, of course. Jamarl, we were just talking about. I'll let you bring us back.
We were just talking about qualified immunity. So, Joe, well, let me ask you this. I'll just give you the definition again and see if you disagree with the definition. We can go from there. That's kind of how I started the first time around. Qualified immunity, first outlined in 1967, is a judicial doctrine that created by the Supreme Court, meaning it's not created by Congress, not created by any law. This is something that the Supreme Court basically crafted that shields state actors from liability for their misconduct, even when they break the law. Under this doctrine, government agents, including but not limited to police officers, can never be sued for violating someone's civil rights unless they violated, quote, clearly established law. While this is an amorphous, malleable standard, it generally requires civil rights plaintiffs to show not just the clear legal rule, meaning it's not even that they break the law and break their civil liberties. It's you have to actually show a prior case with identical acts, meaning the court has had to rule specifically on that very specific issue for them to even take it up as, this kind of breach of somebody's rights or breach of somebody's civil liberties.
And the way in this conversation qualified immunity is being portrayed, and it makes sense, it's what I heard before, is that it's to shield law enforcement from unnecessary litigation, from an overly litigious public that will use any opportunity basically to push back against whatever happened. And I can kind of hear that argument, but on the other hand, for me and a lot of members of the public, it seems that the police, for all the good they do in some ways, are also ultimately a self-serving class, a self-serving profession. They have ties in with the DA, and if they do wrong, if they shoot people, it's not that they're bad people necessarily, anything like that. It's they do an accidental shoot that kills somebody intentionally, unintentionally, whatever, and the people who are in the system with them will protect them. And qualified immunity is this additional shield that basically gives them a level of rights that regular citizens don't have access to. And I think that's the big thing here, just trying to set the debate back up or something like that. Anyway, Joseph, sorry for cutting you. Joe, I want to bring you in for a minute just to get your take in, and Joseph, I want to hear back from you soon too. Joe, what's your take on that debate as it was stated there?
Let me put this in perspective from the standpoint of what the Supreme Court says qualified immunity is, because it's included in both of the cases you're talking about. And the court says that as long as their conduct does not violate clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. What you said is that the officers can break the law and that they are then immune on the basis of qualified immunity. That's absolutely not the case.
That is the case. Just an officer breaking the law in and of itself is not enough to breach qualified immunity. There has to be case law that specifically and explicitly had ruled on it once before. I mean, I can give you Corbett versus Vickers. I can give you another one. Here's another example where Jessup versus the city of Fresno, in which the Ninth Circuit Court granted immunity to police officers who were alleged to have stolen over $225,000 in cash and rare coins while executing a search warrant. These officers clearly weren't acting in good faith. No one contended otherwise, but the court said that while the, quote, the theft of personal property by police officers sworn uphold the law may be morally wrong, the officers couldn't be sued for theft because that particular law, because that particular appellate court had never specifically decided whether theft of property covered by the terms of the search warrant and seized pursuant to the warrant violates the Fourth Amendment.
That's technically a gray zone, but listening to it, it sounds like they're breaking the law. But it's a gray zone technically because courts hadn't decided on it, and that's why this is all in the cracks between what's been decided and undecided.
It's right there. They recognized that the cops were breaking the law, but because they hadn't decided on it explicitly, they get a pass in regards to qualified immunity.
Joe, what's your take?
My take is, one, I can't comment on cases that I actually don't know the facts of.
That's fair.
What you stated to me seems bizarre. I've been in the business of evaluating police conduct for more than 30 years.
Joe, I can give you another one. Corbett versus Vickers. There's plenty of them.
The problem that we have with what you just stated is when I read you what the Supreme Court said qualified immunity, and it said statutorily. So if they're violating a statute such as theft, they should be held accountable. I don't know why in that case that you cited they weren't, but they doggone well should have been. The other part of all of this is that the reason the police officers are singled out in the issue of qualified immunity is because they have an obligation, they have a duty to uphold the law, including taking people into custody, that sort of thing. That's not the case with civilians. That's why the court looked at this, and the court again yesterday in the two cases, the day before yesterday, in the two cases, reiterated what what they believe qualified immunity does as far as protecting the police officers. And one other point in all of this, you made the point that it was not a Congress or not an enacted law, that this is the Supreme Court's version of it or the Supreme Court's view of it.
That's true.
The thing is, the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of what is legal and what is not legal. Congress can pass a law and the Supreme Court can shoot it down. That's the power.
No, buddy, that goes both ways. Congress can also, because the Supreme Court just basically established this as precedent, Congress could pass a law tomorrow and destroy this qualified immunity.
Actually, they perhaps could do that, but only if the Supreme Court then finds that law constitutional. That's the back and forth. That's the reason we have the three branches of government. That's the reason.
That does sound like a back and forth, though. That's a game of ball. That's not an umpire, and it's more symmetrical than that or something like that.
Yes, but I guess the point that I'm making to you, this is not a law passed by Congress. This is something that the Supreme Court created in this kind of legal doctrine, and that legal doctrine can be washed away. Now, yeah, Congress can say something that maybe go too far in regards to legalities of it all, but Congress, are you telling me that you don't believe that Congress can fashion a law that gets rid of qualified immunity that disallows?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I'm saying, though, that if the Congress did do that, then the Supreme Court, if and when it came before the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court could overrule it.
Joseph, you've been in the background for a little while. What do you think about all this?
Well, again, my position is I think the court made the right decision in maintaining qualified immunity. I'm aware of the Fresno case, and again, that is a bizarre case, and I don't know how the court could rule that the cops stealing over $200,000 is not unconstitutional, does not violate their constitutional rights. I mean, that is a bizarre case, but that to me is an outlier. That's not the norm. And if people want to be upset, they should be protesting outside the Ninth Circuit Court on that decision. I mean, because that is unreasonable. It's bizarre. I have no idea how they came to that conclusion.
But that's kind of the point. They came to the conclusion because it wasn't just violating civil rights. It had more to do with this notion of whether there was a previous precedent set. Meaning, it's one thing, a cop can violate somebody's rights while they're on the job. That in and of itself is not enough to breach qualified immunity. That's kind of the point that I'm making here. It is such a shield. I mean, even Spider-Man understood with great power comes great responsibility. But for whatever particular reason, cops want all of the power, but none of the responsibility going along with it. And by the way, do you think...
Do this.
And by the way, Joe, do you think that makes better cops?
Meaning...
Well, real quick, Joe, let me ask the question. Do you think that makes better cops? Meaning this notion that they know that out of 1,000 killings a year, 99% of them are going to walk. And that on top of that, they're never going to be held personally responsible, more likely than not, never going to be held personally responsible for anything that they do on the job. They may sue the city, but the cop himself is going to be okay. Do you think that breeds a certain level of unaccountability in the way that they could do their jobs?
It's actually just backwards. In most cases, you'll find that the city or the government itself gets out under different reasoning. The cop can be sued even though the city is out of it. That frequently happens.
I can count case after case where the city has paid $5,000, $1 million, X amount of money, where the cop himself was not necessarily sued.
Well, then you must have more experience than I have, because 30 years I've never seen a case like that. What I've seen is that they settle it for and the cop himself is not held personally responsible. The city will come back and settle it for the officer. And you're absolutely...
That sounds like it, though.
That sounds the same. That's the same thing.
Like the same thing.
That's the same difference.
No, it's not the same difference. What happens is, in that case, is that the police officer has no say in it one way or the other. The city government will settle the case, And the plaintiff in the case takes the settlement, doesn't pursue it against the police officer.
Because they would never win against a police officer because of qualified immunity. This is kind of the point that I'm trying to make here.
Immunity. This is before the case ever. This is before the case ever. Qualified immunity attaches before the case is presented. That's the whole purpose for it.
Joe, why do cops even need it at this point? From your standpoint, I mean, look, like I made the point before. If 99% of the cases where cops kill people go not even to court, meaning no consequences at all associated with it, then why do you believe that all of these cases, these voluminous number of cases, will be coming out the woodwork against cops if qualified immunity wasn't there?
Incorrect statement. Every police-involved shooting is absolutely investigated, not just by states.
Everyone, each and every one.
Absolutely. There's not one case that I'm aware of in the now 51 years I've been involved in law enforcement one way or the other in which a police-involved shooting was not investigated.
So just so I'm clear, 99% of those cases out of 1,000 each year were clean kills. Each and every one.
I don't know. Clean kills doesn't mean anything.
It does mean something. It means that they were able to kill a person and get away with it. And look, I'm not saying that it was malicious. If a cop was under threat or under attack, they have every right to defend themselves.
But Jamarl, a clean kill being somebody being able to get away with it, well, then technically every one of those kills would be a clean kill. In other words, it's a tautological definition. If you want it's close to what sounds like a legal definition, a clean kill being something that's like, a legal kill. Which
a legal kill.
I don't know what the terminology is.
Basically, that it was a kill that they were not held responsible for, that they were basically a fair kill. I don't know what else to call it. I call it a clean kill.
Well, you can call it whatever you like. That's not the standard by which the officers are evaluated.
What's the standard?
Objectively reasonable, under the totality of circumstances.
Okay, so 99% were objectively reasonable kills. Each and every one, 99% out of 1,000 were objectively reasonable.
Whether that percentage came from,
the percentage, Washington Post did their own analysis of it. You also have another site called Mapping Police Violence that did independent analysis. And as I made the point earlier, the New York Times basically came out with the review. This was back in September, that more than half of police killings are mislabeled. And I went over that study earlier. Basically right here, researchers compared information from the federal database known as the National Vital Statistics Systems, which collects death certificates, with recent data from 3 organizations that track police killings through news reports, public record requests. When extrapolating and modeling the data back decades, they identified a startling discrepancy. About 55% of fatal encounters with police between 1980 and 2018 were listed as another cause of death. The study, conducted by researchers at the University of Washington and published on Thursday in The Lancet, a major British medical journal, amounts to one of the most comprehensive looks at the scope of police violence in America and a disproportionate impact on blacks. Do you disagree with that? I mean, not only is it 1,000, it's probably 1,500.
How do you establish that a police use of force is somehow mislabeled? Either they shot him, they hit him, they ran over him with a car. I don't know. I don't even understand what it's supposed to. What your study is supposed to or purporting.
It's not my study. It's a study from the University of Washington that published in The Lancet.
But now I don't want to get too deep into the sources stuff. And Joseph, you've been out in the background for a little while. What do you think?
I'm about what's the question?
That's pretty valid. We were getting down a kind of a rabbit hole, like getting into a specific source that gets deeper. You know what? We only have so much time left. I want to give each of you a floor for a couple of minutes here. We've got all the time in the world to talk about this stuff. Sort of closing out this conversation, anything you felt didn't get said that needed to be said about this topic?
Well, I think it's a false narrative to say that cops are never held accountable and cops are never sued. I mean, I've been involved in over 170 cases, and a majority of those cases are on behalf of plaintiffs suing the police. So police do get sued. They get sued every day. They get criminally charged every day. So this false narrative that it's impossible to sue the police is not true.
Joe Key.
I absolutely agree. Police officers, I can promise you, I've never seen a police shooting, and it's not just the ones that I've seen from across the country, that did not end up in a civil suit.
Timmy Rice.
In a case in which a person died regardless of how that occurred, whether an intentional use of force, an accident, whatever else, in which the police officer is not sued.
Okay.
Fair enough. We're gonna close it out here. Fiery, contentious, but I want to thank you both for joining us. Joseph, Joe, thank you for being with us this morning.
Anytime.
Appreciate it. Joseph Blattler, former Deputy Chief of Police in Union City, New Jersey, also a professor of criminal justice and principal operator of East Coast Private Investigations. Over 30 years of military and police experience, he's assisted many law firms with expert reports in federal, state, and municipal courts. And then we had Joe Key joining us a couple minutes later. He is former lieutenant for the Baltimore Police Department, over 25 years of experience. For 10 of those years, he served as the commanding officer for firearms training. Charles Key has written the department's policies on use of lethal force and hostage negotiation and is considered an expert witness in criminal trials. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming back, we'll be speaking with Paulo Sotero, retired fellow and former director of the Wilson Center's Brazil Institute, talking about Bolsonaro facing charges, homicide charges, accusations of crimes against humanity for his COVID handling. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And so, an interesting article came out. This is CNN. The Brazilian congressional panel is set to recommend mass homicide charges against President Jair Bolsonaro over his handling of the coronavirus pandemic, according to a leaked draft government report seen by CNN on Tuesday. CNN's Brazil received draft excerpts of the congressional investigation that accuses Bolsonaro and other government officials of allowing the lethal coronavirus to spread through the population in hopes of achieving herd immunity. This was something that Boris Johnson initially tried, but he then pulled back on the policy when he realized the policy was absolutely insane, basically letting the weak die off. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Paul Sotero. He's retired from the Wilson. Paul, thank you for joining us.
A pleasure to be with you. Good morning.
Absolutely. So what do you think about these charges? Are these charges justified? I think I said earlier, I think they are, just because Brazil has like the second highest number of deaths. And there were certain policies that Bolsonaro basically blew off. COVID policy, he didn't necessarily seem to take it legit or serious. At one point, we have malign actors, a document from the U.S. government where they basically make the point that Brazil agreed to not take the Russian vaccine, and I believe even the Chinese vaccine. Eventually, they rescinded on the Chinese vaccine. But all of these things were policies where Bolsonaro just basically didn't take it seriously, and the public suffered because of it. Should he be held on these type of charges of crimes against humanity? Or for that matter, I think they even mentioned genocide.
Homicide, genocide. They've walked this stuff back, but still.
Yes, they walked it back. He will not be charged with homicides or genocide, which relates to accusations of mass murdering indigenous people, using COVID to do that.
Well, to be fair, there's 600,000 people that die from COVID in Brazil. That sounds like mass murder to me, or mass killing anyway, from the standpoint of public policy.
Yes, it is horrible, but the accusations are sound. But we are talking here about a congressional report, a Senate report, that has to be voted in Congress in Brazil. And all the indications right now, this morning, that the most egregious accusations, genocide, mass murder, all this kind of language, it's probably not going to survive the presentation of this report that you mentioned. Not surprising for those of us that follow Brazilian politics. The Brazilian political establishment has its own way of changing things, of normalizing crimes, and of creating situations, especially when the conservatives are the target. For much less than this type of accusation, President Dilma Rousseff was impeached, and former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was sent to jail. This is serious. The important thing about this report is that now we have a record. There was this work by the Congressional Investigative Committee, and not all people listed were heard from the Congressional investigation. This will continue, but do not bet that this will lead to a condemnation or to much less to the impeachment of Jair Bolsonaro. He fully deserves a condemnation. He fully deserves impeachment, but it won't happen because the conservative forces in Congress have already organized themselves in order to prevent that outcome. I personally believe it's a bad outcome for the country, but this is the outcome, and it is so the headline is much less than it really sounds. The president will not be accused of the most egregious crimes that I am convinced that he has committed. And I think the consequence of this, in the end, will be for after he leaves office, which should happen or is likely to happen, according to polls, by a little bit more than a year from today. But those are polls. President Jair Bolsonaro is way behind former President Lula in opinion polls in Brazil, but 1 year and 2 months is a lifetime in Brazilian politics.
As it is, I think, in American politics too. There's just a fast pace here. But what consequences do you see coming on? By the way, thank you for joining us, sir. Paulo Sotero joining us on the line, former director of the Wilson Center's Brazil Institute, now retired fellow. Getting back into it, after the election, say Bolsonaro loses, say Lula comes in, what consequences do you see for Bolsonaro? Would it be these charges? What do you see happening?
Well, the prosecutors could go after Bolsonaro because at that time, if he is no longer president, he will have no immunity from persecution. And he is now a very unpopular person in Brazil, a very unpopular politician, in addition of being the most incompetent politician that has ever occupied the presidency of Brazil. But there is, don't get too enthusiastic about getting Bolsonaro, out or in jail, which in my modest opinion, he fully deserves. The fact is that
it's not going to happen.
Brazil is a very conservative country, and although former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is way ahead in the polls, remember the 2 times where the Workers' Party of President Lula managed to elect a president, which was himself and his successor, Dilma Rousseff, it did it in alliance with conservative forces. The vice presidents were from conservative parties. So this whole game is not yet played, and the negotiations continue in Brazil. It is obviously a moment of great sorrow because we see this highly incompetent government making efforts successfully, in my view, to outmaneuver itself from this situation. And we have, although, thank God, the number of deaths from COVID are coming down in Brazil. Well, we have more than 600,000 people that died from COVID in a country that used to be a champion on combating epidemics. Science in Brazil was born from this effort more than a century ago to combat epidemics, etc. And in this instance, because we have a completely incompetent, insensitive, inhumane government, we have this outcome. It's horrible. It's shameful. It should never have happened. Brazil has all the conditions to combat this thing, but not when you elect a government of people that are not, as you mentioned, that are not intended to fight the problem, to face the danger of an epidemic. Well, we had this similar situation in the United States where the absolutely stellar teams of doctors, epidemiologists, etc., were somewhat limited by the official policies of Donald Trump. So here we go.
Let me ask you this. Are you worried? I mean, in the last election, Lula was also ahead, but of course there was Operation Car Wash, that basically found to be wanting at this point, and, you know, this kind of legal maneuvering or using the legal device in order to get rid of a political opponent, Lula. And the same can be said on some level for Rousseff. Are you concerned of something like that happening this time around with Bolsonaro trying to pull a hat out of his cap with, you know, threats of some kind of hostile takeover or threats of some kind of coup in case he loses? Or at this point, he's so tarnished in regards to his actions on COVID and incompetence in regards to running the government that that's just off the table at this point?
Never rule out anything in Brazilian politics. Bolsonaro is president of Brazil. He has what we call the power of the pen that signs laws and things like that. So, yes, it is possible that he could found allies to outmaneuver himself out of this. It's unlikely because he is very unpopular and very incompetent. So he may not have the support needed to perform such a complicated maneuver. At the same time, there are forces, other political forces in Brazil, trying to experimenting with the idea of promoting a centrist candidate. Mm-hmm. Between Bolsonaro and Lula. The political picture in Brazil is highly polarized right now. The chances of that centrist figure emerging, don't look very likely right now, but we are still 1 year away from the first round of the presidential elections. It is, as I mentioned, those things are very possible in Brazil that you could, and using the power of the purse, which the president controls in Brazil, the executive in Brazil controls it much more than the president of the United States does. The power of the purse here resides in Congress. In Brazil, it really resides in the executive. It's limited by Congress, but he could use this capacity to spend money to become more popular, etc. And most observers in Brazil, most political analysts in Brazil expect that to happen. It may not be enough for him to recover, given 600,000 Brazilians that died of COVID unnecessarily. It was highly preventable, but never discount the power of conservative forces to act and to achieve results in Brazil.
Oh, we're going to have to stop it here, but I think I understand your point. Basically, don't count anything out in Brazilian politics. And the fact that he's going to be the president and have the money or purse strings, he can pull behavior. The voice that you guys were listening to is retired fellow from former director of the Wilson Center, Brazil's Institute. He's covered the evolution of his native Brazil and U.S.-Brazilian relations for nearly 40 years as a journalist and analyst. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Unmasked. Thomas and Stranahan.
Oh, man.
This morning, I was like, oh, dude, I've had my test. I've been tested. I'm good. If you're good, let's just run with it. And let's just go with it. So hopefully nothing weird happens where it's like, Jamal got sick last week. Something just weird when they finally took off the mask. But we're going with it at this point.
Any timing on the boosters?
Yeah, I'm going to booster this month.
This month, cool.
Yeah, we're eligible for it, immunocompromised and all that. So they're basically saying you're fair game, you're going to get it. So yes, I will be doing that. I didn't have any reaction to the last shot. I mean, my arm hurt for like a day, but I didn't have any kind of weird effects for it.
Same for the second shot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my mom was like, oh, I feel bad, I feel miserable. Like, she felt weird for like a day or so. But, and look, that's one of those things, man. If people get shots, they should get a day off, or they should get a day or two off in order just to recover, just be on the safe side. I think that's one of those things that they definitely should put into play. But let's get to the headlines. In the news, yesterday in the United States, there were 83,624 new COVID cases reported, along with 1,557 deaths. That number's going down, good. Over the past week, there's been an average of 79,348 cases per day, a decrease of 22% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 57% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 66% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 45,120,516 people across the United States and has killed an unfortunate 728,400 men, women, and children in this country. A lawsuit filed Tuesday is challenging Oklahoma's law against schools' discussion of racism and sexism, the first federal suit to allege that a conservative state's so-called quote-unquote critical race theory ban is inherently unconstitutional. Similar previous laws were passed ostensibly to eliminate instruction about critical race theory, an obscure legal concept about the ongoing impacts of slavery and racism in the United States that's rarely taught in K-12 schools. But the laws almost never mention the theory, and teachers say the new law limits important lessons on history and current events. We should come back to that because that's actually true. Some of the laws are basically saying you can't teach certain elements of slavery, or you can't teach certain elements about, let's say, history involving other races and stuff like that. It's very weird and far-reaching depending upon how they're using the law. Texas, I'm looking at you on this one. On Monday, the Supreme Court released 2 unsigned opinions blocking cases against police officers accused of using excessive force, and a massive win for supporters of qualified immunity. The privilege is awarded to government officials and even police officers, which allow them to avoid lawsuits unless the person's rights were clearly violated. And the thing is, when I read through the lawsuit, I would have agreed with the Supreme Court on this one. I mean, it was just a horrible case to bring for the qualified immunity thing. Basically, it's like, all right, an officer's being attacked with a hammer. Should the guy let himself get hit with a hammer, or should the guy defend himself? And of course the guy's going to defend himself. I mean, there may be more to it than that, but, I give the benefit of the doubt for cops that are under threat or under danger. It's just the cases where they're flagrantly abusing people's civil liberties, or for that matter, taking their life without any kind of consequence. Per chief congressional correspondent for CNN, per the chief congressional correspondent for CNN, Manu Raju, quote, Biden told House progressives tuition-free community colleges out of the package per multiple sources. Child tax credit won't go as far as some would like, likely a 1-year extension. Home health care likely less than $250 billion. Democrats have wanted $400 billion. Climate change is still up for debate, even though Manchin is basically pushing on this. And talking to House progressives at a vote tonight, what's clear is the climate change provisions are not settled and still a sticking point after the White House meeting. Jared Huffman told me, quote, and me being Manu Raju, that he's a no if the final bill doesn't have the aggressive emission reductions. Asked about Manchin's opposition to achieving a 50% reduction over the next decade, Huffman told me, quote, we're not going to let that be the final word. My view is that the 13th Amendment moment, President Lincoln did whatever he had to do to get that vote. This is one of those times, unquote. We have a clip of Manchin. We have a clip from Manchin where reporters are basically hounding him, trying to figure out what's going on. Manchin recently came out with Sanders, arm in arm. We're talking, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, Biden has been pushing these guys, and Biden has basically dropped the number that he's looking for to something like $1.9 trillion. We're going to see if that's acceptable. I have a hard time believing that's going to be acceptable for the lefties, but we'll see. Let's play the clip of Manchin.
Senator Manchin. So you met with Jamarl. You met also with Biden and Sanders. Are you getting any closer to getting a deal? Can you stop for 1 second? We don't want to chase you.
We're communicating and negotiating. Okay, that's what it's all about. That's what the process is about. And we're having good conversations. We're talking, and everybody and all the players and everybody to understand each other's position. And the talks are very, very good. That's all I can tell you.
Are you getting
talking actually amount to action?
Well, we got a lot of action going on.
Can I ask you, are you voting by the end of the voting?
Are you okay with the carbon tax?
No, we're not talking. We haven't talked about that.
And in terms of it get done by the end of the month, by the 31st?
I truly believe, I'll say this to all of you, I truly believe that if we work in good faith and we understand where we are today and where our country is and the needs we really have, and then the aspirations that we have further down the road, let's do what we can do together. Let's get that piece of legislation agreed upon, that we can start working the framework of that and putting it together. That's going to take a little while. But with that being said, and we have the trust of each other, then we should be able to vote immediately on the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is a tremendous piece of legislation for the president to take with him to Glasgow, and also knowing in good faith that we have an outline of how we're going to, working out the details with all the fine print. That's where I would like to hope to be. So we'll have to see if we can get there.
Can it be done by October 30th?
Well, no, that's complete.
But it's
yeah, but this is the most important. Okay.
Are you saying you oppose the climate tax, or that you just aren't talking about it right now?
The carbon tax.
Carbon tax.
Yeah, no, we're not. We're not. The carbon tax is not on the board at all right now. Okay.
Did you ever get behind one?
We're not on the board. Okay. Let's just make very.
I'm not expanding Medicare. Expanding Medicare. Are you okay with that?
On the child tax credit.
Those are the things we're talking. We're negotiating and talking about everything. Let's do what we can agree on now.
Isn't it amazing? He has a veto over the entire presidential agenda, which is astonishing to me. And I love how politicians can basically say all of these words without saying basically anything. Manchin didn't give away anything outside of, yeah, we're talking. Can we get it done by the 31st? I don't know, but we should get the bipartisan bill. He wants a bipartisan bill because that's the bill that he worked on. He worked with Republicans in order to get that bill passed. And so for him, he put his heart and soul into that bill. But he's like, but yeah, we should pass that bill. Hey, Manchin, are you going to get it done by the 31st? Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we should pass it by, we should be able to get something done.
Can I just do a brief reality check? It seems like they're actually negotiating now or something after they weren't for a long time.
Yeah.
Like for months, right? They were sort of not actually talking.
Exactly. It seems like they were talking at each other more than talking. Yeah,
exactly. They're talking at each other through the media. And then the Democrats have worked themselves into a corner, and now they're forced to negotiate, but there's no negotiating themselves out of that corner. Right. That's where they are, right?
Because the catch is, it's like, okay, if Manchin is saying, Manchin was like, I want work requirements on the $300 going to kids, meaning I want those kids to work. In other cases, he wants, and then he wants to put a limit on it. So people making $60,000. If you live in California, that's nothing. And then that's those type of work requirements. What about the guy making $61,000? That guy's not going to want that program because that guy's going to feel slighted by it. It creates tensions.
It's not nothing, but it's not what it is in the rest of the country.
In California?
It's not nothing.
What about New York and Manhattan?
It's still not nothing. I'll tell you, there are people who make a lot less than $60,000, but it's not as much as it is for somebody growing up in the
West
Midwest
Virginia,
who thinks about $60,000 and they're like, that's quite a bit of money. That's like above average. I could buy a house in a couple of years if I started saving
in West Virginia or maybe Georgia, or South Carolina.
It's a different thought process.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's not a bad. That's pretty decent.
In New York City, California, that's especially if you're living like in a city, New York City, L.A., San Francisco, that's not going to get you too far.
Exactly. So it's like the 60,000 thing. It's like it creates tensions among various people who are in different economic scales. That's one.
I'm just saying it's not poverty.
It's not
poverty.
It's nowhere close to poverty. I want to get a point that it's poverty.
Yeah.
But those people aren't balling. $60,000 in Los Angeles.
No.
But yeah, he's coming up with all of this other stuff. The question becomes, are they going to be able to get this passed by October 31st? And the provision basically boils down to, yes, they have enough in the House to pass a bipartisan bill, but progressives aren't going to pass that bipartisan bill unless there's something clear and definitive on this notion of reconciliation. And at this point, this stuff is still in the air. Let's keep going. Yesterday, the FBI raided a Washington mansion belonging to billionaire Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska. Agents blocked off the property with crime scene tape and stormed through the house. The raid comes during a long battle with Deripaska in an effort to get him removed from a U.S. sanctions list. In June, a judge at a district court in Washington rejected a lawsuit he filed against the U.S. Treasury Department, which sanctioned him in 2018. If I'm not mistaken, they weren't necessarily even answering why they were raiding his house, right? I mean, the reports I was reading on that basically wouldn't necessarily give too much information
Still
on.
don't know exactly yet. We often associate him in the Western press with Vladimir Putin, although, of course, he was also associated with Paul Manafort for a while there, because Manafort had consulted for him for like years and years and years and years back in the 2000s, back in the aughts.
Yeah.
But, and, you know, that he was part of the sort of Manafort investigation, part of that component of the Miller probe. But anyway, we'll be getting into this in a little bit deeper in just a couple minutes with Lee.
Let's keep going. In a new study by economists and organizations, including and regarding the National Retail Federation, has found that America is in a supply shortage, not as much from lacking of shipping, but that Americans are so unbelievably hungry to buy, and to buy anything they can right now. Inventory sales ratios in the country are at a 10-year low compared to how much sellers have on hand versus how much consumers are buying. The Port of Los Angeles also found a 30% uptick in incoming cargo in the first 9 months of the year. In the same time frame, retail sales rose 14.5%, and expected to end at 10.5% to 13.5% on a year. Very interesting. You made the point about the money that was coming in from the stimulus
checks.
Several months ago.
People are buying stuff because they have the money for it.
Well, it's almost near Christmas too.
At this point.
Yeah.
Are you talking about last year or right now?
No, I'm talking about now. We're going into the Christmas holiday.
We're going into the Christmas holiday. I don't think people are going to have as much money.
And I think opening from COVID, where people are like, I'm free.
And I kind of don't buy. I want to get on an economist, and we can talk with Wolf to some extent later, but maybe a dedicated economist to talk about this kind of thing specifically, just like unpacking the supply chain fiasco, what's going on right now.
Because Wolf should be able to do it. Wolf has PhDs. And
no, I know, but I want somebody who's like done a deep dive and written articles on this specific thing or something like that. Wolf can talk about it.
To unpack it and the details of it,
Yes, because this study that we're talking about in this headline right here, they're talking about how, okay, people are hungry to buy. We're buying more, right? But I remember at multiple points during the pandemic watching videos, reading reports on, news stuff on, okay, if I go to a boba shop and I'm trying to buy boba tea.
Oh, boba
tea. Like the tapioca pearl tea inside, it's
I've never
like
had it, but I've seen the stores.
Yeah, delicious stuff in my opinion. Anyway, if I were to try to do that in random parts of the country, for a long time there during the pandemic, and I haven't checked right now, but it might still be continuing, tapioca pearls are scarce. They're hard to buy. They're super scarce. And so they're rationing boba use. Now that's a stupid small thing.
But that's not the only thing. Microchips.
Yeah, you switch over to semiconductors, you look at cars, that's where my mind was going immediately.
Yeah.
The rental price of cars has gone through the roof during the pandemic because of the, and again, my numbers might not be the latest, so some of this stuff might have readjusted. My point is, it's not like people have been buying everything up as far as I can tell, so much as some key specific goods haven't been supplied nearly as well as they could have been or whatever.
Yeah.
The supply chain and everything. So
and the microchip's a big one. I mean, that was shocking. I mean, the overwhelming majority of the chips are just made in Taiwan. And so it's like 90% of the business, this was a weird research I was doing the other day for some reason as I was delving into the shipping thing. If anything happens to that, everything goes down. The United States, like Intel and some of these other places, don't produce chips of that level of magnitude. I think it's like a 3 millimeter or 5 millimeter, something like that. Yeah.
Such a weird situation we put ourselves in.
So yeah, right. And this kind of goes to the way we build our supply chains, where we basically, look, for myself, there are vital resources that I always think that the government should hold on to and control.
That level of autarky, not complete free market openness.
Well, I mean, it is free market, but it's like, for example, energy production. I think that's a vital resource.
Yes.
Transportation. I think that's a vital resource.
Have energy independence, quote
exactly.
Unquote. But also semiconductor independence.
That's an important resource.
And that's the thing. That's what I'm saying. Autarky is a kind of dirty word because it's associated with the Nazis, with Germany, Nazi Germany during. And admittedly, there's no reason to need to make that association. The point being, you need to have. It's good to have some independent self-sufficiency in terms of the basics, so that if things break down, the international trade structure breaks down. If we could get a global pandemic, if we go to war.
What if you go to war?
Exactly.
What if you go to war? I mean, think of the Nazis. The Nazis lost that war because they didn't have oil.
Yeah.
There was a vital resource. I mean, they were even trying to produce their own synthetic oil.
Industrial refineries. And they got some from Romania, but it wasn't enough.
But it wasn't enough. I mean, even when they went into Russia.
The Japanese, of course, that's on the other side of the world. But when they raided, Indochina and Indonesia,
they
needed more supplies.
That's
right. Partly for supplies.
Exactly right. I mean, so it's like many of these countries were basically losing, not because they didn't have the resources in a sort of sense of metal, material, manpower, They didn't have basic stuff like oil and other stuff. And so it's like we're putting ourselves in this position just to save a buck, where microchips are scarce. We don't have the manufacturing capacity to have that in the United States. If there's a war with China, what happens? If Taiwan basically gets hit and China, the first thing they hit is that microchip facility, well, China have those facilities that they can use. What about rare earth minerals? Again, that's something that, yes, you can do in the United States, but that is not necessarily something that we go after. And just seeing the supply shortage now from COVID, and it shows you how fragile we are in the sense of the things that we need in this country. It's just, shocking. It's a horrible misstep. But let's keep going. Two more, and I'll end it. A Brazilian congressional panel is set to recommend that President Jair Bolsonaro be charged with, quote, crimes against humanity, unquote, for his treatment of coronavirus in the country. The assertion is that Bolsonaro intentionally let COVID rip through Brazil in an effort to kill hundreds of thousands of people to achieve herd immunity. The recommendations include 69 other high-ranking officials, including Bolsonaro's 3 sons. Originally, the panel was seeking homicide and genocide charges for the detriment to indigenous people, but has concluded with crimes against humanity. In Earth and Science news, surgeons have temporarily attached a pig kidney to a human body and watched it begin to work instead of the body rejecting it and attacking it. Wow. This is a small step in decades-long effort to be able to use animal carcass for life-saving transplants. Oh, that is rough. I mean, if they did something like that, I would want it to be something where it would be like a super kidney or super liver.
Not a pig's kidney.
Yeah. Well, like if the pig's kidney can consume liquid at a rate that is twice of humanity or whatever it is, that would be awesome.
Then it's a super kidney.
It's a super kidney.
You'll take it.
Yeah, I'll take it at that point. It's like this thing can consume alcohol and break it down at a level that is 3 times the human body or something like that.
But pigs don't
That's
get
pretty
drunk.
cool. Yeah, right.
I'm just kidding.
That would
That's
be pretty
fake
cool.
news. Probably do.
Also, in Earth and Science, Governor Gavin Newsom of California announced a drought emergency across California on Tuesday. He stated that both the lack of precipitation and high temperatures have entered California into the worst drought since the late 1800s. Nearly 88% of California and much of the American West are experiencing, quote, an extreme, unquote, or exceptional drought, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor. Southwest Airlines have reversed course and says it won't put unvaccinated employees on paid leave if they're seeking an exemption. American Airlines Flight Attendants Union told its members that they will not be terminated if they are not vaccinated. Southwest stated that workers, in fact, can continue working if they follow COVID safety procedures until the request is reviewed. The new policy will begin in December. So this does add more credence to the notion that maybe they were shutting down those flights, maybe for some other kind of technical issue we were talking about, but also maybe because they were running out of people because of the COVID thing.
They kept firing people who weren't vaccinated.
Yeah, that might be true. Holiday news, National Medical Assistance Day, good on them. National Braided Fruit Day,
brandied fruit.
Alcohol.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
Brandied Fruit Day. And Day of Unity. I can get behind that. Those are your headlines.
Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Sorry, Jamarl. My favorite, real briefly, because we have our guest on the line, but National Brandied Fruit Day reminds me of my mom because she's into making like brandied fruits. Remember, she kind of segued into living like more of a homesteady life. She has chickens now. She grows fruits and vegetables and stuff
She has
like
a
that.
little farm?
And a little farm, and she's had to move it once because during COVID, they actually had to move like in the middle of December. But anyway, they're back up and doing it. But her thing is she likes to make she likes to take fruit, either her own fruit or fruit that she gets from neighbors, that kind of thing, and like make syrups and make brandied
so cool.
fruit and liqueurs and things like that. This is just her vibe. And so she'll send me home with like, fruits like that occasionally.
So cool.
It just makes me think of her. But anyway.
I'm digging the chickens, by the way. She has her own chicken coops. Does she have like goats or anything like that?
She wants goats. She only has the chickens right now. The big thing with the chickens was she actually designed and built her own chicken coop.
Nice.
Working with like a wood contractor. And I kid you not, it literally has a stained glass window.
Does it?
She got like a refurbished stained glass window for the chickens in the chicken coop. It wasn't super expensive. I don't mean to, they're not doing great on money.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, that's pretty. Anyway, with that, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming back, we'll be speaking with Lee Stranahan, my dad, former host of the show, also host of The Backstory here on Radio Sputnik. We're going to be talking about Oleg Deripaska and the raid on his Washington, D.C. house here in D.C. We're also going to be talking about Loudoun County, Virginia. Vita Bubaraj, district attorney, who's pressing charges against a man who basically, we'll get into it. Basically, he was coming in to complain about how his daughter, who'd been raped by a transgender person, the transgender person got moved to another school where they raped somebody else, and he's basically coming in to complain about this, and then we'll get into it. He gets kicked out. People portray it as if it's his fault. We'll be going into this district attorney for backing and more when we come back with Lee Stranahan. Again, you're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are joined on the line by Lee Stranahan, Sputnik News analyst, host of The Backstory, airing here on Radio Sputnik Monday through Friday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. Follow Lee on Twitter at Stranahan. Check out YouTube. Check out populist.tv on YouTube. Lee, Dad, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm fine. You know, you mentioned that your mom makes brandied fruit and also has chickens and wants to get a goat. You did not mention that she lives in a one-bedroom apartment.
That is a lie. That's fake news.
Not true. Right, it's not true.
I've been
why
to
you didn't mention it.
It's a studio. Gosh darn it. You got to get that right. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. No,
Yeah.
It's a bigger property at this point. They're up in Vancouver, Washington, just over the border from Portland.
Portland.
Yeah. The most recent tragedy is they have this property, and behind the property, there's like this forest that was there. And now the forest got cut down because they're doing development. They're trying to clear it out for apartments or something. And so that was a major strain. But anyway, those first world problems right there, so to speak. Lee, Dad, thank you for joining us.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Let's get into it. Oleg Deripaska, who Jamarl and I were talking about just a couple minutes ago. Oleg Deripaska, known as a Russian oligarch and industrialist, also associated with Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, also associated with Paul Manafort, and we'll come back to that. Anyway, Jamarl and I were talking $5.1 billion is Oleg's net worth. Jeff Bezos here in the States, $199.7 billion USD. We can just round that up to 200. So one guy has 40 times as much wealth as the other.
Never called an oligarch.
And we never called Jeff Bezos an oligarch, although maybe we should. Anyway, Oleg Deripaska's home was just raided yesterday. That was big, big news. As far as I know, they haven't released an official explanation. What's your take on why they did this, Lee?
Well, so unfortunately, there's two complex stories this morning. This and the Virginia governor's race, what happened in Loudoun County, both complex, and I'll try to break it down. Let's just talk about what you said there. So, for instance, you said that Oleg Deripaska is associated with Vladimir Putin. That's because he's Russian.
Yeah.
He's associated with Vladimir Putin the same way that Tim Cook from Apple is associated with Donald Trump. Right? I could show you photos of Tim Cook from Apple, or as he calls him, Tim Apple. That's what Trump called him. Sitting at a table with Donald Trump, sitting in the White House with him when Trump was in office. Is he associated with him? Is he a Trump supporter? Is he Trump linked? It's kind of, but not really. In other words, Tim Cook from Apple is clearly not a Trump supporter, right? But because he's the CEO of a large American company, he's got some association with Trump when he was president, and now Biden, I guess, sort of, kind of. In that same way, Vladimir Putin, leader of Russia, Oleg Deripaska, important businessman, and we'll talk about why he gets called an oligarch in a second. That's about the association. I saw some numbskull on Twitter saying yesterday he works directly for Putin. That's not true. That would be like saying Tim Cook works directly for Donald Trump. And you just go, well, look at the photo here. Well, that's not the case. And so what's happening here, and this answers the question, the raid yesterday on a home that Deripaska doesn't live in, wasn't at, is something that he may own distantly. It's through some corporation, and family members of his lives there. Was a media stunt. It was a media stunt. And the reason he's called an oligarch is because he's Russian.
Yeah, that's the only reason.
It.
Yeah. There's no other reason to that. Because it doesn't even make sense when you compare to Bezos or Tesla or Elon Musk or many other billionaires in the United States.
Well, or the actual oligarchs who ran Russia in the 1990s. Before Putin came into power, after the fall of the Soviet Union, before Vladimir Putin came into power, Russia was run by oligarchs. It's guys like Berezovsky or Gusinski or Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who has direct connections to Biden, Obama, and McCain. And when I say direct connections, I don't mean they're in a picture with them one time. I mean Senate Resolution 322 in 2005, sponsored by Joe Biden, co-sponsored, only two of them, McCain and Obama, was, anyone can look it up, Senate Resolution 322, 2005, was in support of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who clearly was an oligarch. This is when these people had taken over businesses that had been under the Soviet Union, and after they'd taken them over, buying them for pennies on the dollar, they were really running things. Those were the oligarchs. And so the purpose of calling Deripaska an oligarch is to confuse people. It sounds a little scary, but also Bezos is not an oligarch in the sense, and not at all in the sense of the 90s oligarchs. In fact, as close as I would say as you get to a modern oligarch who's American is a guy like Soros. And the reason I say that, and this will tie into what we're talking about in Loudoun County as well, Soros is a guy who uses his immense wealth to really control politics. And even more so in a way, now one could argue that because Bezos owns the Washington Post and because Amazon has big contracts with the CIA, for instance, that he's in that territory. But even he's not, I would not even put him in that category. Soros, I would. But the guys who ran Russia in the 90s, before Putin came in, they're who they want to protect. And those are the real oligarchs. And they were people who really ran. The reason I say that is Bezos doesn't run politics. The guys in the 90s like Berezovsky and Khodorkovsky really ran things. They really ran things in Russia.
You're saying the difference between those things is basically one had a hand in politics in a way that could directly affect policy, whereas Bezos is more in the background of the stuff.
Yeah, and for instance, Vladimir Putin, the oligarchs in the 90s are the ones who put him into power. They thought he would be another Yeltsin, a guy who they could control, a puppet.
Yeltsin's vice president.
And he turned out to have a spine. Mm-hmm. And you know, this is why Vladimir Putin is very popular in Russia, because under the oligarchs in the 90s, things in Russia were literally a bloody mess. I mean, people were getting murdered in, oligarch turf wars. And Khodorkovsky, for instance, basically had someone beheaded, a mayor had someone beheaded. But that's a guy who's supported by Biden, Obama, and McCain. And by the way, no one's ever done, look it up, no one's ever done a story on that, that two presidents and a presidential candidate all supported a Russian oligarch who had someone decapitated, so goes the story, who the CIA said at the time was involved in bad stuff. So this Deripaska raid, like I say, it wasn't even his house. So why'd they do it? The reason they did it is so in future stories they can say, you watch this. The Washington Post and New York Times will be able to say, Deripaska, whose house was raided in October. That's okay. Does that make sense?
You're saying it's there for purely for political effect. Like there's no reality to it. I mean, because they're not saying explicitly why. They say he sued the U.S. government over sanctions. Okay, fair enough. They make the point that it's not his house. Okay, fair enough. They said something about relatives. And they say a news release announcing sanctions said Deripaska had been investigated for money laundering and accused of threatening the lives of business rivals, illegally wiretapping government officials, and taking part in extortion racketeering, none of which have anything to do with that raid. Like they're basically a mum on this raid, which is very weird. So look, you might be right.
Also, none of which I think, if I'm correct, none of that also occurred in America. In other words, if he's accused or was investigated, I don't believe it was in America that he supposedly did any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And the Democrats have used him and the Republicans have used him because remember, this is my theory and has been for some time. Russiagate was not about Trump. Wasn't about Sanders. Wasn't about Hillary Clinton. Russiagate was essentially about demonizing Russia under Vladimir Putin. That's what it's about. And that's why both sides ultimately demonize Vladimir Putin. That's why both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, when Bill Browder went and testified in front of Congress, he not only had Dianne Feinstein in rapt attention, but Chuck Grassley as well. Everybody goes along with this. So the Republican story, don't forget, this is true, too, about Deripaska. Deripaska hired Christopher Steele's Orbis. Do you remember that?
Mm-mm. No.
Shane?
No. Please keep going.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, go. Anyone can look it up. It's very easy to find. Deripaska hired Christopher Steele's Orbis Communications to do some work for him. And my theory on this is, unlike the oligarchs in the 90s, Deripaska is actually running a business. He's like an aluminum, I believe titanium as well, magnet in Russia. At one point recently, he was one of the richest guys in Russia. Deripaska is actually, he didn't just buy something at bargain sale prices that used to be part of the Soviet Union. He's actually built a business. And that thing about being tied to Putin, Shane, I think you've seen it. Jamal, I don't know if you're seeing the footage of Vladimir Putin, Oleg Deripaska, and the pen.
I don't think so.
It's very famous. In Russia, everybody knows it. And this goes to the idea, see, what they both try to do is go, Deripaska, tied to Putin. You know, they try to make it seem scary. Putin was not happy with Deripaska. That was a decade ago, something like that, because of the way workers were being treated. And he called him in, and it was on camera, and then had him sign something. Putin had Deripaska sign something, basically, you know, rectifying the problem with the workers. And then on camera, in front of everybody, Putin basically goes, "Give me back my pen."
Okay, I'm looking at the clip now.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the clip now.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's a power move, and that's not something you do to your friend. Jamal, if Shane ever does that to you, you're in trouble. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that looks pretty bad, right? It's like you're on camera, and he's basically pulling rank. Give me back my pen. This is kind of like the Trump Chris Christie thing. We had Chris Christie, you know, he's joking him. It's like, get out of here, Chris. Get going on your flight. Yeah, that's a power play. It's definitely a power play.
It is a power play. And the only reason I'm bringing it up is it goes to the idea that, in fact, they're not buddies. And literally you'll see buddies used sometimes. You know, Putin's, by the way, you're both Putin's buddies as well. You know that. By working at Sputnik, we're all Putin's buddies. And we've never gotten a Christmas card. Do I ever get, I never got a call when I was in the hospital. Did Vladimir Putin call me? No, he did not. And so I'm just saying, anybody, this is what they try to do. They try to, I won't say smear, because I wouldn't have minded if he'd called, but I actually have come to like and respect Vladimir Putin as world leaders go.
Yeah.
By the way, it's a very low bar. But I actually like and respect Vladimir Putin from stuff I've seen. And I think he's a good world leader.
He's a competent leader.
Better than the ones we have.
Yeah.
But he's not Deripaska's buddy. And by the way, I don't think Deripaska's an evil guy. I think he's a businessman who's probably trying to figure out the next aluminum deal. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And therefore it's not really...
Well, they always cast this stuff with a certain nefariousness associated with it. Like even the term oligarch on some level has a nefarious tint associated with it. And everything that happens in Russia, of course, Vladimir Putin has a finger in it. Like that's the way it's always cast, you know. So it's like, oh, these guys are being managed or moved, or the public who approves of Putin, oh, they're just being propagandized through. It's never accepted, you know, in the way that it is.
That makes sense. I want to pivot here.
Yeah.
We only have so much.
Wait. Before you do, I just want to say one thing. Some idiot with a large Twitter following said yesterday, Deripaska works directly for Vladimir Putin. And I commented that it was stupid. It was literally the stupidest thing I'd seen. Because it's stupid. It's like saying Tim Cook works for Donald Trump or Joe Biden or whoever.
Yeah.
It's stupid. And boy, I'll tell you, the descending Twitter hordes immediately came down and thought they triggered me like I haven't figured out that I work for Sputnik. As though it's a shock to me that I posted a show on Sputnik for 5 years. And it's very interesting, though, how we talk about Blue Anon. They're vicious.
Yeah.
The Russiagate conspiracy theorists are nuts. So that's all. I just want to say that.
No,
in case they're
that makes sense.
listening.
That helps to paint a picture of what you personally had to deal with here. Loudoun County, Virginia, you brought up George Soros, and I knew this because we were talking about this yesterday, and I did just the tiniest bit of research looking into Buddha B. Barrage, the prosecutor here, who was funded by Soros. I remember, you know, partly I wanted to talk to you about this because I know this is the kind of thing that you know well about. I think that people will maybe inflate George Soros on the right a bit over what he's actually done in some ways. They'll sort of use him as a stand-in for a lot of very wealthy people. But one of the things that I know that George Soros certainly has done is in local races fund key people in key positions in local political races, like attorneys, judges, that kind of thing. Try to do this sort of prosecutors to do this long haul sort of reform, and it's pretty quick. I say long haul, but this is some of this stuff's going pretty fast. Of America's judicial system, and we see that here, and it's irritating a lot of people, inflaming a lot of people. But Loudoun County, can you just set up the facts of this story and then maybe go to Soros as you see fit, Lee?
Okay, well, as I say, it's complex, and one of the reasons it's complex is because I've been critical of the father in this Loudoun County case because he did clearly assault cops. And in the footage that you can find easily, he's fighting, and then he went on Fox, and he said, I didn't know it was cops. Well, where you did know it was cops, sir, was when you're in cuffs and you're fighting the people in cuffs. Right? So at that point, he clearly knew, and he was physically fighting them. That being said, let me talk about Ferguson for a second. When they set fire to Ferguson a few years ago, when there were the big riots in Ferguson, one of the things that struck me was they had an older black guy who came out, resident of that town, and they asked him, like live on the news, what do you think of these riots? And he looked around, he was very thoughtful, and he said, on one hand, I don't like the fact that they burned down my town. On the other hand, none of y'all would be out here if they hadn't burned down the town. And the only reason you're talking about this is because of this riot. And you know what? I couldn't argue with the guy. He was exactly right. So whether you're in favor of the riots or not in Ferguson or wherever, they get news. And in this case, this guy fighting the cops, whatever I say about it, and I'll talk about the case in a second, because it's very hard to find the facts of the case.
Oh, I see. You're making the point that this story would have never gotten airplay if it wasn't for that. Meaning the fact that his daughter or that the kid got raped was never going to be brought up.
His daughter.
Yeah, his daughter got raped. That was never going to be aired or anything like that. It was the fact that he fought the cops was the thing that brought the story to light.
Exactly right. And by the way, allegedly got raped because these are minors and the records are sealed. But what I've been able to determine is the guy who he's saying, the young guy who's 14, 15 at the time, who he's saying sexually assaulted his daughter, 6 months later, he was moved to another school. And 6 months later, we do have arrest records there that he was arrested for 2 counts of sodomy at that school. And we don't know much else. And it's the same, but it's the same guy that this father is saying assaulted his daughter. It seems to me like there's not just smoke here, there's some fire, right? And there was an arrest in the second case. And it does seem like it's a cover-up in the same way the Catholic sex scandal was a cover-up.
Well, and to be clear, the prosecutor did respond to this. So in an interview with the Daily Wire, Loudoun County Commonwealth Attorney Buddha Biberja, I guess that's the name,
yes,
who was described as a quote-unquote progressive elected county prosecutor who had run for the position campaigning to end mass incarceration, had pushed to jail time for Smith, who was slapped with charges, okay? But when talking about the 15-year-old, they make the point, she defended the decision to move the student to a different school, stressing the choice was made based on the information at the time and the view that it was unlikely that the teen would re-offend. Quote, "We believe, based on the facts, that he had no history of having done this prior to this offense and was alleged, said Bibierja." Now, this says the teen was fitted with an ankle monitor and transferred to another school where he later was accused of sexual assault against another female student. So basically, the student offended once, it allegedly raped a woman or raped a girl in the school, by the way, meaning he was in a dress, transgender, in the woman's bathroom, raped a student. Man, mind you, this is the worst fear, right? This is what conservatives always scream about in regards to transgender students or transgenders in bathrooms going into opposite bathrooms. And in this case, the prosecutor, instead of basically throwing the book at the person, ends up saying, okay, we're going to put an ankle monitor on him and we're going to send him to another school where he basically reoffended. And her response was, well, we didn't think he was going to reoffend. Why didn't you think he was going to reoffend? Like, what was your reasoning and rationale for not thinking that the person who you basically slapped on the wrist and just sent to another place, kind of like a Catholic priest being sent to another parish, why did you think that the sexual offender wasn't going to reoffend, considering they basically got off on rape in the first go-around? No, I agree with you, Lee. This is disturbing, to put it mildly. And prosecuting the father.
Prosecuting the father who comes
prosecuting the father.
Just for disorderly conduct, that kind of thing, which from what I'm reading is pretty rare.
But you know what? I've seen the footage. He should have been prosecuted.
Yeah.
So I'll say this again. The father should have been prosecuted. Sorry, I've seen the videotape. That dude was physically, I feel like anybody, if you're physically fighting cops, you get what you get.
Let me ask you this. If your son, if Shane, well, let's say this. If Shane was in the bathroom.
You don't bring me into this tomorrow.
I'm bringing Shane into this. If Shane was into this, if Shane, your kid, bathroom, you just let him go to the bathroom, let's say at the fair or something like that. And there was a guy, I don't know, transgender.
Wait, I'm the one I'm the recipient. What?
Well, I'm making the point that if something happened to your son and you find out, I would imagine you would be belligerent and pissed. And if you went into a situation where they are not listening to you, I think you would be pretty angry.
Sentencing. That might factor in the sentencing.
But in terms of
how much time you get for that. But you know what? You don't get a pass because your kid is assaulted and because you're frustrated for fighting cops.
But, so here's the thing. I like that you're bringing both sides into it, and that's necessary, and thank you for doing that. And yet also, everybody who's looking at this situation, it's like the fact that the kid, who's admittedly a kid, but who allegedly rapes several people, basically gets off the perception as scot-free.
Yeah.
While on the other side, the parent who's complaining about it gets slammed, whether it's fair or not when you look into the intricacies of the situation. Like you're saying, that tableau, that painting, whatever, just the images of those events it looks off, gotten a lot bigger. Yeah. And that's what you're saying about how this story is amplified.
And I guess my thought is the feeling, like, I can empathize with the feelings of the father, feeling like this is a massive injustice. Like, my kid has just been raped, and you guys are giving this guy a pass. I would be extremely upset. Like, imagine situations where you are in court and the killer who just killed your daughter or who just raped your daughter or who just did something, you're the father, you're the protector of that kid, and for whatever particular reason, you weren't able to protect that kid in that situation, and the guy laughs at you or smiles at you. Are you telling me you're not going to be enraged by that? And am I really going to hit that guy and try to prosecute that guy, understanding of the situation that person is in? And I can, for the most part, say, yeah, you shouldn't be fighting cops, but I get it.
Again, that's sentencing and not the charging, and I hear that point.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And here's the other thing, too. If the kid was actively raping someone in the room on camera, they would have stopped him. Boom.
Hopefully.
Otherwise, you've got an investigation, and it does take a while. Whereas you've got this father actively fighting the cops. And it's on videotape.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to me. But on the other hand, that's why I started with the Ferguson story. But none of y'all be talking about this, right? And that's the point. It did bring, and if this father has to get, has to spend a month in the pokey or whatever,
They suspended his charges. They gave him, I think, 10 suspended with a year of good behavior.
Yeah, but the point is, whatever he gets, he brought national attention to this story. And so using the none of y'all be talking about this rule, he was successful. What he did, I can't argue with it as having brought light to the story. And it seems like a legitimate story. It seems like a real story. So it's complex. There you go.
That makes sense. Thank you for that. Good conversation. I'm glad we got into it. We got to go because we've got another guest on the line. Lee Stranahan, thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you, and good luck with the chickens in the studio apartment.
We'll do. I'll tell you what. We need a shovel in there. Lee, thank you for joining us. For those listening, Lee Stranahan, Sputnik News analyst, host of The Backstory, airing here on Radio Sputnik Monday through Friday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. Also my dad and also the former host of this show. Follow Lee on Twitter at Stranahan. Check out populous.tv on YouTube. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Leo Flores, political analyst and Latin America campaign coordinator at Code Pink. Coming back in just a minute.
Fault lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Let's have a conversation about Haiti. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, but let's get back into it. There's all sorts of chaos going on in Haiti, especially around this notion of kidnapping. Recently, as many as 17 American missionaries have been reported to be kidnapped by gang members in Haiti on Saturday, including 14 adults and 3 minors. There's also been cases where they've kidnapped preachers in their church. They've kidnapped busloads of human beings at one point. The thought is that at the death of that Jovenel Moise was basically the president that was assassinated, had certain connections with some of the gangs that were there, and that once he died, it created all sorts of calamity, basically with the gangs radically increasing the number of kidnappings. I mean, more than take place in Sao Paulo, Mexico City combined. So let's have a conversation about what is taking place in Haiti and why have things devolved to such a level. To have a conversation, we're joined with Leo Flores. He's a political analyst and Latin American campaign coordinator at Code Pink. Leo, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me back on.
Absolutely. Always. Anytime you want to come on, my man. What on earth is taking place in Haiti, and why has it devolved to such a degree in regards to the kidnappings? The kidnappings seem to have escalated radically in a very short period of time. And is this related to President Moïse's assassination?
I mean, it is related to the Moïse assassination, but it's also related to several other things, right? You had a massive earthquake in Haiti. You have got still the COVID pandemic with very few people vaccinated in Haiti. And this has caused, a huge kind of economic shock to the country. And so between the Moïse assassination and the instability in the government, the COVID, the earthquake, and now the ongoing economic shocks, it's not really all that surprising that you would see a surge in crime, especially because really the state right now in Haiti is kind of in flux. It has very little credibility. And so, but I also really should note that this is kind of, when I read this article about these kidnappings in Haiti in the Washington Post, I was really curious. So I looked at the search on the Washington Post. This was the second article about kidnappings in Haiti in kind of 8 days. And then just yesterday, I think it was, or maybe a couple of days ago, the Washington Post once again put out an opinion by its editorial board calling for intervention in Haiti. This is the second such opinion they've issued since July. So it's really interesting to me to see how the Washington Post is trying to frame Haiti in order to justify an intervention.
Well, what should we do with Haiti? I mean, at this point, what it seems like is it's a failed government on some level. The government, like you said, has no credibility. The U.S. has basically been picking the leaders of that particular country. The president prior was assassinated, and there hasn't been anybody brought to justice, per se. The United States has been fingered as potential responding, or at the very least having some part of it. Colombia, apparently, has been some part of it. You have gangs that have basically taken over various parts of the country and openly taken over various parts of the country with the government being unable to do anything about it because, again, it lacks legitimacy. And you have people who are basically terrified to even come out their homes. Some of the people were calling it Russian roulette to even step out of their house. What should we do? Or should we do anything? I mean, this is kind of the issue. It's not that I'm saying, hey, let's have military intervention. It's not that.
Right.
It's more so I'm looking at it and saying, okay, what should happen in this situation considering it looks like a failed state, or at the very least look like it's getting to the point of a failed state?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think we have to also tie this into the issue of migration. And we had all these Haitian migrants come about a month ago and immediately deported. That has to stop. I think we have to have a sort of TPS, or temporary protected status, program for any Haitian who comes to the United States and, not deport them immediately because...
Well, agreed. Many of them haven't even been there for years. I mean, like many of the people who were coming to the United States at that point were coming up through like Brazil, Mexico, and some of the other countries where they were living for years. And when they hit to the United States, many of them were just immediately deported, despite the fact that they have been living in other countries for years. I mean, we're basically deporting them into a war zone.
And that happens, somewhat commonly with, particularly with the children of Haitian migrants who might have even been born in the U.S., who don't necessarily have papers, but then came very young and then are deported to a country they've never known. The point is that these mass deportations are creating even more instability in Haiti.
What is this? But are these real mass deportations? We were talking about this briefly after the show yesterday, and we accepted most of the people who were at the border. The vast majority of the Haitian migrants at the southern border we took in, only a few thousand were pushed back out. And these were people who hadn't had to flee the immediate crisis, the earthquake itself. They'd been in South and Central America for years, many of them, making a long, slow transit up to North America. And it's now here at this point that they had to apply for asylum, not due to the earthquake, maybe because it was a convenient time, but that's outside of my ability to properly speculate on. But anyway, the mass deportations, I don't see that happening. We have a deportation crisis. We have an immigration crisis in general at our southern border. But this Haitian-specific issue, I don't see that. What's your take on that, Leo?
Well, I think it definitely did happen. I mean, we certainly saw a huge increase in the number of flights from deportation facilities throughout the southern United States to Haiti all throughout September. And I mean, I think that's well documented. But then going back to the issue of what should be done in Haiti, I mean, in terms of the international community, first of all, we need to send massive humanitarian assistance to Haiti, including vaccines and economic assistance to kind of weather the economic shock. And then secondly, this idea that, it's the international community's responsibility to fix Haiti is totally backwards, because really what we've seen in Haiti, basically since its independence, is the international community, particularly France, the United States, the Organization of American States, and even the United Nations, the mission there, MINUSTA, they've been really undermining Haiti's sovereignty and creating a situation in which you have these puppet leaders that are not supported by the masses. And that creates this huge tension that leads to what we're seeing now, which is, a very weak state, if not a completely failed state.
But Leo, you led with France there, and then you went to the United States and you brought in other countries in this sort of nebulous larger international community, which admittedly does weigh heavily on the fates of individual Haitians. But France, top of the list, and should be like separated from the other countries by a wide margin because it is out of France's subjugation that Haiti's suffering all these problems. It's dealing with the long-term debt peonage that they were in under the French government. I mean, isn't this more France's problem? Why is it that is it just location? I mean, admittedly, Monroe Doctrine, we have had a pretty heavy hand, but still, isn't this ultimately France's problem, Leo?
I mean, if we were talking maybe 40, 50 years ago, I would say, yeah, the bulk of the responsibility falls on France. But the United States has invaded Haiti 3 times in the last 100 years, right? And the United States has played a really outsized role in interfering in Haiti for decades. I mean, it was because the prior president before Moïse is a guy named Michel Martelly. In the first round of the elections, Haiti has 2 rounds where the top 2 go on through to the second and final round. In the first round, he came in 3rd place, meaning that he was not going into the second round of the election. But it was due to U.S. pressure. The United States forced him into that runoff, and then he became president. I mean, this is the sort of, and then the United States, of course, is backed coups in Haiti. So France has a lot of historical blame, but the United States has a lot of current blame. And, about a month ago, you had the special envoy for Haiti resigned in protest at U.S. policy.
Yeah.
The U.S. special envoy, Daniel Foote.
Mm-hmm.
And he has really this amazing resignation letter. And I want to read a quick paragraph from that, if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, it was a scathing letter. Please.
Writing in September, he says, last week, the U.S. and other embassies in Port-au-Prince issued another public statement of support for the unelected de facto Prime Minister, Dr. Ariel Henry, as interim leader of Haiti, and has continued to tout his, quote, political agreement, quote, over another broader, earlier accord shepherded by civil society. The hubris that makes us believe that we should pick the winner again is impressive. This cycle of international political interventions in Haiti has consistently produced catastrophic results. More negative impacts to Haiti will have a calamitous consequence, not only in Haiti, but in the U.S. and our neighbors in the hemisphere. I mean, to me, it's kind of shocking to see someone from the State Department basically saying that the problems in Haiti have been caused by imperialism. He doesn't use that word, but that's what he's getting at.
Yeah, I read that when he first came out with that. That was shocking. I mean, considering, though, I think you'd agree with me with the level of corruption, with the difficulty that the government is having maintaining peace and even control. Would resources being sent to Haiti, meaning mass humanitarian resources, would they even be used in a proper way? I mean, I guess I'm getting to the point where it seems like the government is so mangled or so not in a position to do anything significant that sending resources or sending money wouldn't necessarily get distributed in a way that it would be necessary for the population.
Also, the story right now is that these people got kidnapped. So wait, hang on a second. Americans get kidnapped, and now we're wanting to send this country money. Admittedly, an oversimplification, but optically, I don't see that playing in any way here in the States.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's difficult, but I think that's really kind of the only answer. And I totally agree that there will be mass corruption if we send those funds, and it's not clear how many, how much it will actually get to the people that need it. But there has to be kind of something
or just
that sounds rough.
No, because just giving more money, putting more money into the pot to be grabbed up by the people who have the most power, which are the people who have the most guns, the most violent people. I don't want to support that system. That's what I get worried about. And Jemima Pierre, who we were speaking about this with yesterday, she recommended hands off Haiti. Just get out. The U.S. isn't intervening in any positive way. I'm more on that end. But then there's still this problem of, okay, but we got people who are kidnapped and $1 million a head ransom. We got to close this out. Leo, I want to thank you for joining us. It was really good talking with you this morning.
Thanks for having me on.
Leo Flores, political analyst, Latin America campaign coordinator at Code Pink. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a minute with headlines and our last hour. See you on the other side. Be right back.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together that means you're certainly listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. If you can hear my voice, then you're listening. I think that's well, there's some truth in that. Anyway, let's get into headlines. It's October 20th. It's just past 9 a.m. Eastern, and it's time now for COVID news, COVID stats. Yesterday, in the United States, there were 83,624 new COVID cases reported, along with 1,557 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 79,348 cases per day. That's a decrease of 22% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 57% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 66% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. And as of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 45,120,516 people across the United States. It has killed here in the U.S. 728,400 people. In national news, a lawsuit filed Tuesday is challenging Oklahoma's law against school discussions of racism and sexism. That's the first federal suit to allege that a conservative state's so-called critical race theory ban is inherently unconstitutional. Similar previous laws were passed ostensibly to eliminate instruction about critical race theory, an obscure legal concept about the ongoing impacts of slavery and racism in the U.S. that's rarely taught in K-12 schools. But the laws almost never mention the theory, and teachers say the new laws limit important lessons on history and current events. On Monday, the Supreme Court released 2 unsigned opinions blocking cases against police officers accused of using excessive force. That's in a massive win for supporters of qualified immunity. The privileges awarded to government officials and even police officers, which allow them to avoid a lawsuit unless another person's rights were clearly violated. Biden told House progressives tuition-free community college is out of the package. Child tax credit won't go as far as some would like. Home health care will likely be less than $250 billion, although Dems had wanted $4 billion. This is according to Chief Congressional Correspondent for CNN, Anu Raju. Representative Jared Huffman also stated that he will do whatever he has to do to get climate change bills approved and to get Manchin support. Yesterday, the FBI raided a Washington mansion allegedly belonging to billionaire Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska. Agents blocked off the property with crime scene tape. They stormed through the house. The raid comes during a long battle with Deripaska in an effort to get him removed from a U.S. sanctions list. In June, a judge at a district court in Washington rejected a lawsuit he had filed against the U.S. Treasury Department, which sanctioned him in 2018. A new study done by economists and organizations, including and regarding the National Retail Federation, has found that America is in a supply shortage, not so much from lack of shipping, but from the fact that Americans are so unbelievably hungry to buy and will buy anything they can right now. Inventory sales ratios in the country are at a 10-year low, comparing how much stuff sellers have on hand versus how much consumers are buying. The Port of Los Angeles also found a 30% uptick in incoming cargo in the first 9 months of the year. In the same time frame, retail sales rose 14.5% and is expected to end at 10.5 to 13.5% on the year. National Retail Federation, they have not too far away. I've seen their building, not too far away from our studio here, by the way, like 5 blocks away or something. Just one of the organizations featured in this study. Interesting. In international news, a Brazilian congressional panel is set to recommend that President Jair Bolsonaro be charged with crimes against humanity, at least they were, for his treatment of coronavirus in the country. The assertion was that Bolsonaro intentionally let COVID-19 rip through Brazil in an effort to kill hundreds of thousands to achieve herd immunity. Recommendations also included 69 other high-ranking officials, including Bolsonaro's 3 sons. They have, however, sort of walked that back and said that, it's not actually going to happen. Genocide, homicide, crimes against humanity, those charges will not go through. In Earth and Science news, surgeons have temporarily attached a pig's kidney to a human body and watched it begin to work instead of the body rejecting and attacking it. This is a small step in the decades-long effort to be able to use animal carcasses for life-saving transplants.
I wonder what did they do to get that to not reject? I mean, because if you get For example, a regular transplant that you get from another human being or a cadaver, they give you all sorts of antibiotics. They'll give you all sorts of immunosuppressants in order to prevent your body from basically going after it. Well, you would think that an animal carcass would be that much more so, considering it's not even a human being.
Yeah.
It's one thing if your antigens are basically even, like you have an exact match for antigens. At that point, it's somewhat of a lore issue. Think of these as certain numbers that give an indication on whether or not the kidney is going to be more or less compatible with you. There's also other things like blood type and those type of things that go into play. But at this point, they have ways of dealing with issues of blood type and other issues. But the antigen match, it's rare to find somebody with the same antigen match.
I think
things like sex, things like some kind of illness, those
from
things.
From what Austin was saying, the pigs are raised specifically for this purpose. So they can probably breed them to pull out the antigens they
like
don't
some kind of genetically modified thing where it allows it to very interesting.
Yes.
I mean, that's a big deal. If they're able to do that, that's a big deal. I mean, I know they had the kidney thing, the device that was coming out eventually that they were doing research on.
Yeah, artificial kidney.
Yeah, but at this point, now they have a pig kidney. Like I said, man, if they can genetically engineer for that, up it, make it like a super kidney. That'd be phenomenal.
All right, I think I want to come back to this one. We got some more headlines, so let's get into them. Governor Gavin Newsom of California announced a drought emergency across all of California on Tuesday. That's like every year at this point. He stated that both the lack of precipitation and high temperatures have entered California into its worst drought since the late 1800s. Again, that's like what they've been saying every year for a while now, the worst drought in over 100 years. Maybe some of the specifics.
It seems to keep happening.
It seems to keep happening, like the same verbiage is my point. Nearly 88% of California and much of the American West are experiencing an extreme or exceptional drought. That's according to the U.S. Drought Monitor. In business news, Southwest Airlines have reversed course. They say they won't put unvaccinated employees on unpaid leave if they're seeking a vaccine exemption. American Airlines Flight Attendant Union told its members they will not be terminated if they're not vaccinated. Southwest, meanwhile, stated the workers can, in fact, continue working if they follow COVID safety policies until their request is reviewed. The new policy will begin in December. And holidays this morning, today really, it is Miss America Rose Day. It is International Chef's Day. It's Hagfish Day, and it's Information Overload Day. There we go, Information Overload Day. And you don't look up hagfish. You don't figure out what that looks like. Don't make the same mistake I just did. Anyway, with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Interesting stuff.
Yes.
We've already kind of hit it, but in talking about like transhumanism or these different things, and artificial kidney, also pig kidneys, just in general, Gattaca, it's been so long since I've seen Gattaca.
Gattaca was phenomenal.
Gattaca was phenomenal, but Gattaca is not the one where they train people, they raise people up as to basically harvest dirt.
No, you're thinking of Repo Man.
There's Repo Man, but that's also a component. It's a big component in different sci-fi flicks. But I'm just trying to remember, Gattaca's not the one. It gets a little bit,
Gattaca was the one where they basically engineered, and the engineered people basically got the better jobs, better life, because basically they could say, okay, how long is this person going to live? What capabilities are they going to have? And the normies, the people who didn't get it, were basically like janitors and everything else because they couldn't necessarily compete in the competitive.
This one guy, I think played by Ewan McGregor, if I'm remembering correctly, won't accept the lot. He's raised as a normie, whatever. He's not super genetically engineered. He doesn't accept it. So he tries to get into the space program that's reserved for the elite genetically superior. He gets through it through like fraud, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then
he has to like clean his desk all the time because if there's like a particle of DNA, he could be
cover
tested.
your ears, plot spoil, worrying folks. Yeah. At the end, he loses. The thing crashes, if I remember correctly, because he fails. Am I not remembering this right?
No, he didn't crash.
Doesn't he crash? I thought something like this happened. Does he go into space?
He goes into space. No, he goes into space. Him and his brother get into this kind of swimming contest. His brother, who's genetically engineered, fails in the swimming thing. Oh, yeah. I mean, he wins for the first time. But no, he goes into space. I thought it ended with him just going into space.
It might be.
I didn't see
it might be
crash.
a little bit later.
Oh, that's pretty cynical.
I watched it like 20 years ago. I was like 9 years old. In terms of...
It's like he committed fraud and then crashed the spaceship.
Exactly.
That would be horrible.
Committed fraud to stay in the program and then he crashed the spaceship. That's how my memory works, Jamarl. But
oh, that would be horrible.
Did it not go that way?
No, it didn't go that way.
That movie?
Not that I remember. No. My memory of it, he goes into space. And that's where it ends.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody in the chat's using the word for this would be a chimera in some way, not a cyborg. You're chimera. Multiple species coming together. You got a pig kidney. But yeah, that's what that would be.
That's uber interesting. I mean, the catch becomes the issue is always compatibility. and whether or not the body was just going to radically reject it, and the amount of immunosuppressants that you need to kind of kill the immune system to not bother it. I mean, there's a few things that they can do. One thought was if they irradiate the person, like basically give the person, not chemotherapy, but give this person like a radiation thing where you just basically destroy the immune system. And when the immune system rekindles itself, it doesn't necessarily look at the kidney as an issue. But that has all sorts of problems and complications. I mean, cancer, brain cancer, all of these other things that can basically affect the body. The other idea was that if they gave, lymphocytes? Not lymphocytes. What are the things where they harvest, I think sometime from the liver when a person has cancer and they're trying to give them, it's like they can harvest it from the bone or something.
Lymphocytes?
No, it's not lymphocytes. They harvest it, I think, from like the bone, from like the hip bone or something.
Marrow? I don't know.
Yeah. Is it marrow? I don't know if it's marrow.
I mean, bone marrow is in
I can't think of the name of the thing, but it may be marrow. But whatever it is, they give it to the person. Oftentimes when a person has cancer, sometimes they would transfer it over to the other person. But in this case, giving it along with the kidney or with the organ, the thought is that it also calms down the immune system for basically attacking it by integrating
the uptake of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the rejection is a big deal. And if I'm not mistaken, the majority of transplants or the majority of people who need kidneys are coming from rejection. Just because it doesn't last the entire course of a life. Like the person is on prednisone, the person is on rapid immune. There's another one. They might have become more sophisticated in the drugs that the person is taking.
In other words, most kidney replacements are replacing people who've already had their kidney replaced.
Potentially.
They're getting it sort of doubled up.
But don't quote me on that.
Okay.
Because it's been a while since I looked into that stuff. That was kind of when I had the transplant and all. But yeah, a lot of those things fail. I mean, it's good while it lasts, but at the point where it fails, you're just basically going through rejection again.
But is there anything ethical about this? Is there anything like morally kind of weird or skewed?
I guess that goes to the notion of killing animals in general.
Maybe, or just being part one with the animal.
Yeah.
I'll put it like this, man. Hannibal, a show that my brother and I have been watching, and we're most of the way done with it, but it's truly grisly.
Hannibal Lecter,
the TV show Hannibal. Great TV show.
Killer.
Yeah. But he's sort of the villain throughout the whole thing, but he's also like a very main character, and he's close into everything. Anyway, Hannibal, about a serial killer, about a cannibal specifically. Hannibal the Cannibal is the whole thing. And it's very smart, very well-written show. And a big thing they play with is, okay, you're eating people. We eat animals all the time.
What's the difference?
So what's the boundary? Where's the exact boundary line? What's the soul? What's human nature? These different things, these shades of definition. Well, this is testing those definitions, isn't it? So
the only difference between eating a person versus eating the animal is just a person talks.
Is it? I don't know. Well, these are speculative questions maybe we don't have time for. But my point is, this type of move leads us to ask that question in a much more practical way. Is this person a full person? Does somebody, and that's the thing. It sounds so screwed up that somebody who receives...
It's a person, a full person.
Exactly.
I mean, that's like saying if a person loses a leg, is a person a full person?
Well, that's the Theseus ship problem. But like, okay, so if I'm part robot, and that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Say I'm part robot. Right. Do I have more or less rights than any other person? Say I have dramatically greater capabilities in some domains.
Right.
Do I have more or less rights than another person? My point is, all this stuff suddenly becomes a matter of practical conversation.
Well, it depends. Look, for me, the person is the consciousness, not necessarily the body. I mean, the person could be a head in a jar, and he's still a person, from my standpoint, providing that the person can talk and communicate and everything else and engage and interact. If the person gets a cyborg leg because the leg was blown off, it's still a person. I mean, the issue is, even if you had to take a person and put that consciousness into another body, it's still that person.
What if we found out that the pig kidney and other pig implants, and you can include the robots too, start to change how we think? In the same way that our consciousness is not just up in our brain, it's distributed, more and more people are led to believe these days, throughout our body. So your gut has its own sort of sense of awareness of what's going on inside it, and there's this feedback loop.
Has a consciousness into itself.
So what if our consciousness starts changing, which seems pretty plausible if there's this whole somatic theory is true that our body really does make our mind. What if we start changing, our personalities start changing, and we become not more pig-like necessarily, but less recognizably, okay, that's a human being who behaves in certain recognizable ways. You know what I mean?
I knew some people were saying if the person gets a heart transplant, as a person takes on some of the behaviors of the other person who gave the heart transplant.
That's so trippy, reading about that stuff.
I don't know. I mean, the person is still the person. I guess the thing is, even if the person is being influenced by the organ, how much influence is a kidney going to have on the person? Like, what changes, if that makes sense? Like, what is the thing that you believe is going to change? Like, what aspect of consciousness does a person change? And even if that person changes, does it still undermine who that person is? I mean, even if the person tweaks their perspective a little bit. I mean, you can tweak your perspective just by taking drugs. Person takes gabapentin, they feel a little more upbeat. Yes, that person has changed, but has that person fundamentally changed in a way where they're not that person anymore? I don't know. I mean, for me, kidney is not going to make the difference of the individual being a person.
No.
And undermine the rights of the person. I mean, it is a little weird.
It's a little bit weird. And my point is, the weirdness is the sense that we have that we're entering sort of unexplored ethical territory.
Yeah, this is transhumanist stuff.
This is transhumanist stuff. And my point is, all those questions start to apply. And the best time to start asking them is earlier than later, if we're going to see them eventually.
I suppose after the fact, it was like, hey, is there something weird?
Yeah, or
20, 30 years in.
Look at this weirdly oppressive split-class society where people who get transplants, who need them, are seen at a lower tier or whatever. You know what I mean? Those kinds of questions. Because, anyway, we got to go into our break. Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
We'll be coming back in a minute, speaking with Professor Richard Wolff, talking about supply chain breakdowns and inflation in our economy, the state of our economy going forward. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, back with Professor Wolff on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I'm pretty sure you've seen the news about supply chain breaks, inflation, and of course, prices going up and empty shelves. It's getting towards Christmas. People want to start buying stuff, and yet the ability to buy stuff is being hampered by supply chain breaks. Now, some of this has to do with COVID. Some of this has to do with COVID in other countries or even energy shortages. Let's say in China, for example, where some of the factories might not necessarily be up and running. We have 100 ships sitting off the coast, and that problem is only going to get worse considering there are more than 10 that are waiting to come in the next few days. To have a conversation on how all of this started, why has this broken down in such a way, and probably getting to this notion of just in time, not holding inventory and everything else to save a buck doing so. We're joined with Professor Richard Wolff. Professor Richard Wolff is Professor of Economics Emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and a visiting professor in the Graduate School of International Affairs of the New School University in New York City. He's the founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. His latest book is The System is the Sickness: When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, and is available with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. Professor Wolff, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. The system is the sickness. That sounds pretty apt to describe this particular situation. Can you explain or give us, in any words that you want or in any particular way that you want, what on earth is going on with these supply chain breaks? And why is this happening? Is this really just an issue of COVID, or is this something deeper that's problematic here that COVID is expressing?
Well, the answer is it's both. That is, it is a situation provoked in part by the pandemic, but it is more deeply a part of our system, and that's because the way our system handled, or more accurately, mishandled the pandemic leads to this. So let me go back and do a little basic economics here. Supply chain problem, that's an abstract, vague idea. You know, it's like saying, gee, the weather was poor. You have to answer the question, why? Why would the supply chains that were elaborately created over decades suddenly be a problem? And the minute you ask that question, you kind of begin to see where the answer lies. Over the last 30 years, in the desire to make more profit, and that's the key driver here, corporations around the world, and I'm going to focus on us here in the U.S., American corporations began to move production all over the world, where wages were lower, where laws were more allowing you to pollute the air or the water or whatever the various conditions, so that we supplied inputs to American factories from 10,000 miles away or 4,000 miles away, from Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, and so on, because it was profitable. Nobody held a gun to your head. Nobody made the businessmen and women who run American enterprises do this. They did it because it was the best profit option that they had. Here's the problem. The good news for them was cheap wages. That was by far the most important issue. Lower taxes, all kinds of extras that were wonderful. That was the good news. The bad news was, if you are bringing stuff that's crucial to your business from a very long distance, you'll discover that you are vulnerable in a way that you weren't before. When you brought things to New York that were manufactured in Buffalo or in Cleveland or in Kansas City, a very different situation from bringing them from China or India or Brazil and so on. And that means you've got to lay out money to compensate, to cover the vulnerability. And it doesn't have to be a pandemic. It could be a vulnerability because workers in a port go on strike, because there's a tsunami that wipes the port out, that there are political changes that lead governments to urge their production to be exported to a different part of the world. All of these things can be handled, but they have two problems. You have to see them, and you have to pay for them. Let me give you an example. You will remember a few weeks ago, a few months maybe back now, that a ship got stuck in the Suez Canal.
The Ever Given.
We all, saw the picture of the ship kind of squeezed between the two sides. Well, an awful lot of ships use the Suez Canal. That's why it was built there. But as the ships have gotten larger and as the ships have become more numerous, here's what has to happen. You have to widen the Suez Canal, and you have to dredge it so it's deep enough, and you have to offset the natural collection of soil and other kinds of things that clog up canals. I mean, it's a very old story, nothing new about it. And that costs a lot of money. And that money has to be kicked in either by the companies that use it in terms of fees, or by the country in which the canal is located, Egypt, and so on. That all has to be worked out. And it costs a lot of money, bottom line. And the companies in question didn't want to spend the money, because if you really did that, then the whole profitability of exporting your jobs for 40 years would have been put into question. It might not have looked such a good decision. And after all, the current CEO is in that position because he or she 10, 20 years ago got all excited about long supply chains. So, it's a little bit like Americans discovering you can't neglect your infrastructure, because if you don't maintain the ports and the railroads and the roadsides, it's going to catch up with you at a certain point and cost you a lot of money. Be cheaper to take care of it along the way.
A brief comment. Comment briefly on this one, Professor Wolf, just because you're framing this all in terms of capitalism. This is all sort of, these are short-term profit mistakes is one way of looking at this. In the long term, if these companies approached omniscience, if they got wiser, if they had more knowledge and more foresight, wouldn't they have benefited more? Wouldn't they have profited from keeping the Suez Canal open, from keeping these supply chains greased with butter, whatever, everything working efficiently? Isn't this a sort of time frame thing here? Not capitalism per se.
Well, no. That's the problem. Capitalism is a short-term calculation. Think of every CEO this way. You're a CEO on average, if you take a look at it, for somewhere between 6 and 12 years in most cases. There are some who are there longer, but mostly it's a short-term situation. And that's true for people as they go up the hierarchy pretty much as well, from vice president to senior vice president, all the rest of it. And when you want to move up in the hierarchy, you've got to produce tangible results that show up on a spreadsheet, and they got to show up while you're in that job in order for you to move up to the next one. If you sit on a job and you say, well, yes, our profits went down these last 2 years, but I can show you that that's because I made a big investment in a long-term strategy, you can kiss your job promotion goodbye. That's not what's wanted. That's not what your boss wants. That's not what the stock market investors want to see. None of them. So, yeah, it's a long-term project, but you're facing a system that is organized not to see and respond. Everybody knows that infrastructure, you know that if you have an automobile, you got to get it to service. You got to change the oil. You got to do the things without which the thing is going to break down. And everybody kind of knows. Your mechanic, if he's honest, will tell you it's cheaper for you to pay me to change the oil than for you not to do that. Don't be, pound, penny, foolish, wise. Don't do that. We all know.
This is kind of like the Boeing 737 issue, right? Where Boeing was basically, instead of focusing on engineering, it's better taking the time in order to ensure that the plane can compete with, I believe it's Airbus, that they said, okay, well, we need to be able to compete. We need to be able to compete immediately. And so let's just add some programming in and make the engines larger. In which case, you end up having these planes that basically fall out of the sky because they didn't want to take the time to do the proper engineering for it. They were chasing short-term profits as opposed to a long-term.
What's clear to me, whether this is capitalism or not, is that the United States did one thing and China did another. The United States did not anticipate this as the world guarantor for trade. And China, at least on its own end, seems to have weathered this storm. And from everything that I've seen, would do the same thing, would have managed the Suez Canal crisis that we saw earlier this year, that, over 10% shut down in world trade. They would have either seen that coming or hopefully solved it sooner.
That's the catch.
Well, I think maybe here we have a little bit of a moment of a role reversal between us here. I'm not sure the Chinese would do it all that much better. They might.
Really?
Because what the Chinese have is the advantage, which is peculiar language for me to use, but they have the advantage of being new at all of this. Their cities are brand new. Their transportation network that links their cities, it's all brand new. The question will be, will they maintain it? Will they take care of it? We know the United States has failed at doing that. I'm not 100% clear that the Chinese won't fail too.
But it seems that their incentives are different.
Something you and I will have to discuss 5 or 10 years from now.
After we see the evidence roll in.
No, I feel you on that, but it seems their incentives are different.
An example. Rapid trains are an absolutely crucial part of the future of transportation in the world. Trains that go, 100, 200 miles an hour, and that cut the time for people to get together in one city from another, for freight to be moved from one part of the country to another, from the ports to where the markets are, from the production to where the ports are, and all the rest. 2/3 of the fast trains in the world right now, 2/3 of them are located in the People's Republic of China. The United States, if you use the real definition of fast trains, have 0. We have the Acela from Boston to Washington, which I have taken many times. It's faster than the old train, but it is nowhere near the speed of what we're talking about that exists in China and in some other parts of the world. But the United States is so far behind that we're talking about a problem that is going to be catastrophic, because the price of everything that uses a railroad has to be higher in this country because it takes longer, because the cost of the freight is higher.